deep in the scorched deserts of Arizona, where abandoned mining towns stand frozen in time, something waits in the shadows. These ghost towns remember every life lost in their depths, every scream swallowed by the darkness of their minds. Tonight, the Haunted Fears horror family brings you 11 encounters that will make you question what lurks in America's most desolate places. From the cursed halls of Jerome to the blood-stained ruins of Ruby, these are the stories that survivors wish they could forget. If you're ready to face the darkness, hit that subscribe button and join the Haunted Fears family, because we upload terrifying content every single day. Turn off your lights, because once you hear what happened in these forsaken towns, you'll never look at the desert the same way again. I quit my job after one shift at the Jerome Grand Hotel, and I've never told anyone the real reason why. What I experienced that October night in 2019 wasn't just fear. It was the certainty that I was surrounded by the dead, and they knew I didn't belong there. My name is Beckett, and I was 34 years old when I took the security position at Arizona's most haunted building. I needed the money desperately after my divorce left me broke and sleeping on my brother's couch in Prescott Valley. The job posting seemed perfect. Overnight security at a historic hotel in Jerome, decent pay, and the graveyard shift meant I wouldn't have to deal with many people. The manager, a weathered woman named Scarlett, who looked like she'd seen too much, interviewed me in the hotel lobby, surrounded by antique medical equipment and old photographs of stern-faced miners. "You know this used to be a hospital, right?" Scarlett asked, studying my face for a reaction. "The United Verde Hospital, operated from 1927 to 1950. A lot of people died here, Beckett. Mining accidents, tuberculosis, the usual suspects for a copper town. Does that bother you?" I shrugged, trying to appear confident. "I don't believe in ghosts, if that's what you're asking." Scarlett smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's what they all say at first. You start Monday night, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Your main job is to walk the floors every hour, check the exits, monitor the security cameras, and make sure our guests aren't disturbed. We get a lot of paranormal enthusiasts staying here, and they can get overzealous." Monday came too quickly. I arrived at 9:30, parking my beat-up Toyota in the employee lot behind the massive 5-story brick building that clung to the side of Cleopatra Hill like a monument to suffering. Jerome itself was unsettling in daylight, with its steep streets and historic buildings that seemed to lean toward you as you passed. At night, with fog rolling up from the valley below, the town felt like it existed in a different time entirely. Scarlett met me at the employee entrance and handed me a ring of keys, a radio, and a clipboard with a floor-by-floor checklist. "Fourth and fifth floors are where most of the activity happens," she said casually, as if discussing the weather. "Fourth floor used to be the surgery wing. Fifth floor was where they kept the tuberculosis patients. Both have the highest death counts." "Activity?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You'll see. Or you won't. Depends on the night." She showed me to the security office, a cramped room off the main lobby filled with monitors displaying grainy black and white feeds from cameras throughout the building. "Every hour you make your rounds. Start on 5, work your way down, log anything unusual in the book." She tapped a leather-bound journal on the desk, its pages thick with handwritten entries. "And Beckett, if you hear someone calling your name, don't answer. The dead here, they like to play games." I laughed nervously. "You're messing with me." Scarlett's expression didn't change. "Read the logbook. Every security guard who's worked here more than one night has an entry. The ones who only lasted one night, they usually don't stick around long enough to write anything down." She left before I could ask what she meant. The first 2 hours passed uneventfully. I watched the monitors, seeing nothing but empty hallways and the occasional guest returning to their room. At midnight, I began my first rounds. The elevator creaked as it carried me to the 5th floor, and when the doors opened, the temperature dropped noticeably. The hallway stretched before me, dimly lit by reproduction vintage fixtures that cast more shadow than light. My footsteps echoed on the old linoleum as I checked each exit sign, each fire extinguisher, marking them off on my clipboard. Room 542 caught my attention because the door was slightly ajar. I knocked, called out security, and pushed it open when no one answered. The room was unoccupied according to the reservation system, but the bed looked disturbed, as if someone had been lying on top of the covers. The antique medical equipment on display, a rusted wheelchair, an examination table, glass cabinets filled with ancient surgical tools, seemed to watch me as I backed out of the room. I was halfway down the hall when I heard it, the distinct sound of a hospital bed moving, its wheels squeaking rhythmically against the floor. It came from behind me, from the direction of 542. I turned, but the hallway was empty. The door to 542 was now closed. I hadn't closed it. My radio crackled with static. Then a voice, faint, distorted, said something I couldn't quite make out. "Hello?" I spoke into the radio. "Scarlett, is that you?" Only static answered. I checked the radio. It was set to the correct channel. The front desk should have heard me. I tried again. Nothing. The fourth floor was worse. The surgery wing still had its original layout, with a central nurses' station surrounded by recovery rooms. Someone had left several of the old hospital beds in the hallway, arranged as they might have been in the 1940s when the building operated at capacity. As I approached the nurses' station, every hair on my body stood up. The air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't name. And then I saw her. A woman in a white nurse's uniform stood at the station, her back to me, writing something on a clipboard. She wore her dark hair in victory rolls, a style from the 1940s. I could hear the scratch of her pen against paper. My rational mind insisted this had to be a guest, maybe someone who worked at the hotel doing a historical reenactment for the tourists. But my body knew better. My legs refused to move closer. "Excuse me," I managed to say, my voice cracking. "Miss." She stopped writing. The silence that followed felt alive, predatory. Slowly, she turned her head to look at me over her shoulder. Her face was gray, her eyes empty, black voids, and when her mouth opened, no sound came out. But I heard screaming inside my head, dozens of voices, hundreds maybe, all crying out at once in agony and terror. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran back to the elevator and hammered the button until the doors opened. I rode it down to the lobby, my heart hammering, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip my clipboard. The security office felt like a sanctuary. I collapsed into the chair and stared at the monitors, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. That stress and the creepy atmosphere had played tricks on my mind. That's when I saw her on the fourth floor camera. The nurse stood in the exact spot where I'd left her, but now she faced the camera directly. Even through the grainy black and white feed, I could see those empty eye sockets staring into the lens, staring at me. She raised one arm and pointed down the hallway toward the camera at the far end. I switched to that feed. The hallway was full of people, patients in hospital gowns, doctors in white coats, nurses pushing gurneys. They filled the corridor, a crowd of translucent figures going about their routines as if the hospital had never closed. I switched frantically through the other cameras. The fifth floor showed similar activity. A whole wing of tuberculosis patients, some standing at windows looking out at a Jerome that no longer existed. Others lying in beds that weren't there anymore. On the third floor, I saw a man in mining clothes, his body crushed and broken, trying to open a door over and over again. The second floor showed a woman holding a baby that wasn't moving, rocking back and forth in a chair that had been removed decades ago. The phone on the desk rang, making me jump so violently I knocked over my coffee. I stared at it, watching the old rotary-style hotel phone ring 4, 5, 6 times. Finally, I picked it up. "Hello?" "Room 542, a woman's voice whispered, barely audible. "Help me, please. It's so cold." "Who is this?" My voice came out as a whisper, too. Room 542 is empty. There's no one. He locked me in, the voice continued, as if she hadn't heard me. The doctor. He locked me in the freezer. I can't get out. I've been here so long. Please. I'm so cold. The line went dead. I sat frozen, the receiver still pressed to my ear, until the automated voice told me to please hang up and try again. I replaced the receiver with a shaking hand and looked at the monitors again. The 4th floor was now empty. The 5th floor showed nothing but vacant hallways. Everything appeared normal, just an old hotel in the middle of the night. I should have left then. I should have walked out and never looked back. But I needed this job desperately, and part of me, the stubborn, rational part, insisted there had to be an explanation. Maybe Scarlett had set this up, some kind of hazing ritual for new security guards. Maybe the radio and phones were rigged, the cameras, playing recorded footage. I decided to check the 4th floor one more time, to prove to myself this was all an elaborate prank. The elevator doors opened on the 4th floor, and immediately I knew I'd made a mistake. The smell hit me first, antiseptic mixed with something rotten, like meat left out too long. The overhead lights flickered in a rhythmic pattern, and beneath the electric hum I heard other sounds. Moaning, crying, the clatter of metal instruments, the squeak of wheels on linoleum. The hallway stretched before me, but now I could see them all clearly. Not as transparent figures, but as solid as I was. The hospital was operating around me, full of patients and staff from 70 years ago, all going about their business as if time meant nothing here. A doctor walked past me so close I could have touched him, carrying a tray of bloodied surgical instruments. He didn't acknowledge my presence. A patient on a gurney was wheeled by, screaming about the pain, about wanting to die, about the mine collapse that had crushed his legs. 2 nurses discussed a patient in room 418 who wouldn't make it through the night. I stood paralyzed in the middle of this ghost hospital, invisible to all of them, watching the past replay itself over and over again. Then I heard my name. Beckett. It came from down the hall, from the nurse's station where I'd seen the gray-faced woman. Beckett, come here. The voice was gentle, almost motherly. We need your help. I backed toward the elevator, not taking my eyes off the nurse's station. The woman in white appeared again, standing beside another nurse, both of them looking directly at me now. They could see me. Unlike the others who passed by obliviously, these 2 registered my presence. The second nurse smiled, and her smile was wrong, too wide, too many teeth. Don't leave yet, the first nurse said. You haven't finished your rounds. Don't you want to check on the patients? Some of them have been waiting so long for someone to help them. The elevator was behind me, but the doors had closed. I pressed the button frantically. The nurses started walking toward me, their movements jerky and unnatural like marionettes with tangled strings. Behind them, other figures began to turn and look at me. Patients, doctors, orderlies. One by one, they stopped their routines and stared. The entire 4th floor of the dead focused their attention on the living person in their midst. The elevator dinged. The doors opened. I threw myself inside and hammered the lobby button. As the doors closed, I saw them all moving toward me now, a crowd of the deceased converging on the elevator. The last thing I saw before the doors shut completely was the gray-faced nurse pressing her palm against the glass, her mouth forming words I couldn't hear. The ride down felt like it took hours. The elevator stopped on the 3rd floor, and my heart nearly stopped with it. The doors began to open. I pressed the lobby button repeatedly, praying the doors would close again. Through the widening gap, I saw the crushed miner standing there, waiting. His eyes met mine, and his ruined mouth tried to speak. The doors closed. The elevator descended. It stopped on the 2nd floor. This time, I closed my eyes, not wanting to see what waited there. I heard the doors open, heard someone step into the elevator with me. The smell of blood and copper filled the small space. I kept my eyes shut tight, my fingers still pressing the lobby button as the elevator began to move again. I felt breath on my face, cold as winter air. A voice whispered directly into my ear, "You don't belong here yet, but you will. Everyone comes back to Jerome eventually." The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. I opened my eyes and ran, not bothering to grab my jacket or my car keys from the security office, just running for the front entrance. Scarlett was sitting in the lobby, reading a book. She looked up as I burst through, heading for the door. "Leaving early?" she called after me. I stopped, turned to face her. You knew. You knew what was up there." She marked her place in the book and set it aside. "I told you. Everyone who works here sees something. Most don't last the night. A few come back, learn to coexist with them. The hotel operates just fine. The guests love it. But the building remembers what it used to be. And the people who died here, they haven't all moved on." "Why would anyone work here?" I asked. "Because the dead aren't the ones you need to fear," Scarlett said. "They can't actually hurt you. They're just echoes, memories burned into the walls. But they can show you things, make you feel things. Most people can't handle that. I understand if you can't either." I left without another word. I walked the 3 miles back to Prescott Valley rather than go back inside for my keys. My brother picked me up on Highway 89A, found me walking along the shoulder in the dark, and drove me home without asking questions. I called Scarlett the next morning and told her I wouldn't be returning. She said she understood and that she'd mail my paycheck for the partial shift. That was 6 years ago. I never went back to Jerome, never drove through it, never even looked at pictures of the place. I found other work, eventually got back on my feet. But sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I think about that elevator ride down from the 4th floor. I think about the voice that whispered in my ear, telling me I'd be back. And I wonder if it was telling the truth, because despite everything, despite the terror and the nightmares that lasted for months afterward, part of me wants to go back. Part of me feels pulled toward that massive brick building on the side of Cleopatra Hill, toward the thousands of dead who still walk its corridors. They're waiting for me, I think. Just like they waited for everyone else who died in that place. And maybe one day I'll stop fighting the pull and walk back through those doors. Maybe one day I'll take my place among them, another echo in the Jerome Grand Hotel, forever replaying my one night of terror for whoever comes after me. But not yet. Not yet. I spent 14 hours buried alive in an abandoned gold mine. And the worst part wasn't the darkness or the fear of suffocating. The worst part was realizing I wasn't alone down there, and whatever shared that space with me had been waiting in the dark for a very, very long time. Summer of 1998. I was 22 years old, fresh out of Arizona State with a photography degree and absolutely no idea what to do with my life. My name is Aurora, and back then I thought I was invincible. I'd spent the previous year traveling around the Southwest, photographing abandoned places for a portfolio I hoped would get me noticed by National Geographic or some other prestigious publication. Ghost towns were my specialty. The decay, the history frozen in time, the stories told through peeling paint and rusted metal. I'd been to dozens of them, always alone, always pushing further into restricted areas than I probably should have. Vulture City had been on my list for months. Located about 12 miles from Wickenburg, it was one of Arizona's most productive gold mines in its heyday, operating from 1863 until 1942. The town itself was small, never more than a few hundred residents, but the Vulture mine produced over 340,000 ounces of gold and 260,000 ounces of silver. By the late 90s, it was privately owned, technically off-limits to the public, but the fencing was old and full of gaps. Everyone knew you could get in if you were determined enough. I drove out there on a Tuesday in early June, which in retrospect was stupid. The Arizona desert in June is a furnace, with temperatures regularly exceeding 110 degrees. But I wanted that harsh midday light, the way it created deep shadows in doorways and made the desert landscape look alien and unforgiving. I parked my Jeep about a half-mile away, not wanting to advertise my presence, and hiked in with my camera bag, 3 bottles of water, and a flashlight. The town was smaller than I'd expected, maybe a dozen buildings in various states of collapse, mine equipment scattered everywhere like the bones of mechanical dinosaurs. I spent 2 hours photographing the surface structures, the assay office with its caved-in roof, the glory hole where the richest ore had been extracted, the crushing mill with its massive machinery still intact. The heat was oppressive, shimmering in waves off the rocky ground, and I'd already gone through 2 bottles of water. That's when I saw the mine entrance. Not the main shaft, which was properly sealed with concrete and steel bars, but a smaller adit, a horizontal entrance tunnel, cut into the hillside behind the collapsed remains of what might have been a storage building. The opening was maybe 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, partially hidden by creosote bushes, and definitely not secured. Someone had placed a weathered wooden sign nearby that read, "Danger Unstable," but the wood was so old the letters were barely visible. I should have walked away. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to leave it alone. But I'd never gotten photographs from inside an actual mine before. The images would be incredible. The tunnel receding into darkness, the tool marks on the walls, maybe old equipment or rail tracks. Just a few shots, I told myself. I wouldn't go deep, just far enough to capture the atmosphere. I clicked on my flashlight and crouched to enter the tunnel. The temperature dropped immediately, a relief after the brutal heat outside. The adit extended straight back into the mountain, shored up with old timber supports that looked disturbingly fragile. The walls showed clear pick marks, and about 20 feet in, I found what I was looking for. An old ore cart sitting on rusted rails, half filled with rock. Perfect. I set up my shot, using the flashlight to paint light across the cart while the camera's long exposure captured the tunnel fading into darkness behind it. I took several frames, adjusting angles, getting creative with the composition. I was so focused on my work that I didn't notice how far I'd gone. When I finally looked back toward the entrance, it was a distant square of bright light, much smaller than I'd expected. That's when I heard the sound. A low groan, like metal under stress, followed by a shower of dirt and pebbles falling from the ceiling. I froze, barely breathing, my flashlight beam fixed on the timber supports above me. The wood was ancient, some of it clearly rotted through, and I was suddenly viscerally aware of the millions of tons of rock suspended above my head, held up by nothing but these deteriorating beams. Another groan, louder this time. More debris fell, and then I heard the crack, sharp and clear as a gunshot. One of the support beams 20 feet behind me closer to the entrance simply gave way. The ceiling came down in a roar of dust and stone, and I ran deeper into the mine, away from the collapse, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I sprinted into the darkness. The roar seemed to last forever, but it was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. When it finally stopped, my flashlight revealed what I'd feared. The tunnel behind me was completely blocked. Where there had been a passage leading back to daylight and safety, there was now just a wall of rubble. Rock, timber, dirt, all compressed into a solid barrier that might as well have been a mile thick. I was trapped, buried alive, and nobody knew where I was. I hadn't told anyone I was coming to Vulture City. My Jeep was parked far enough away that it wouldn't be immediately associated with the mine. It could be days, weeks, maybe months before anyone found me, if they ever did. The panic hit then, a wave so intense I thought I might vomit. I hammered on the rubble with my fists, screaming for help, knowing it was useless but unable to stop myself. My flashlight flickered. The batteries weren't fresh, I realized with horror. I'd been using it for hours already for my photographs. Maybe I had a few more hours of light, maybe less. When the initial panic subsided, I forced myself to think rationally. The collapse had been behind me, closer to the entrance. That meant the tunnel might extend further ahead. Maybe there was another way out, a connection to a different shaft or adit. It was a slim hope, but it was all I had. I turned away from the rubble wall and shone my flashlight deeper into the mine. The tunnel continued for another 30 feet before opening into a larger chamber. This was clearly a working area. Wooden platforms at different heights, more ore carts, tools scattered on the ground. Several passages branched off from the chamber, darker mouths leading deeper into the mountain. I checked each one, my heart sinking as I found them all ending in dead ends or areas where the ceiling had already collapsed years ago. I was well and truly trapped. The only exit was buried under tons of rock. I sat down on one of the wooden platforms, trying to conserve the flashlight battery, trying to think. The air was cool but felt close, heavy. I wondered how much oxygen was in here, how long it would last. Hours, days. Would I suffocate slowly, or would the battery die first, leaving me in absolute darkness until I simply went mad? That's when I heard it. A sound from one of the side tunnels I'd just checked, the one that ended in a collapse about 40 feet in. A scraping sound like metal dragging across rock. I pointed my flashlight toward the noise, my hand shaking so badly the beam danced across the walls. "Hello?" My voice cracked. "Is someone there? I'm trapped. I need help." The scraping stopped. Silence filled the chamber, so complete I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, from the same tunnel, came a different sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, the sound of boots on stone. Someone was walking toward me from the collapsed dead end, which was impossible because I'd just checked it and there was no way through. The footsteps grew louder. I stood up, backing away, my flashlight trained on the tunnel entrance. A figure emerged from the darkness, a man in mining clothes, the style from a century ago. Canvas pants, suspenders, a work shirt stained with sweat and dirt. He wore a miner's helmet with a carbide lamp attached, but the lamp wasn't lit. His face was weathered, covered in dust, and his eyes were wrong, too dark, too empty, like looking into deep wells. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "This mine, she's hungry, always hungry, takes what she can get." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. He stepped closer, and I saw that his boots didn't quite touch the ground. He wasn't walking. He was drifting, floating an inch above the rocky floor. 1894, he continued, moving closer still. Cave-in took 12 of us. They never dug us out. Left us down here with the gold in the dark. Been here ever since, waiting. Others come sometimes. Not many. Most of them leave. Some of them... He smiled, showing teeth stained black. Some of them stay. More figures emerged from the side tunnels. Other miners, all wearing clothes from different eras. Some from the 1800s, others from the early 1900s. A few that might have been from the 1940s when the mine finally closed. They formed a semicircle around me, all with those same empty eyes, all floating slightly above the ground. "Please," I managed to whisper. "I just want to leave. I don't want to die here." "Nobody wants to die in the dark," one of the other figures said. A younger man with a crushed chest, his shirt soaked with old blood. "But the mine decides. She always decides." My flashlight flickered again, the beam weakening. The figures moved closer, and I realized they weren't solid. I could see through them, see the rock wall behind them. They were ghosts, echoes, whatever you wanted to call them. But they felt real, and the cold emanating from them was real, and the terror they inspired was absolutely real. The light died. Complete darkness swallowed everything. Darkness so absolute it felt physical, like being submerged in black water. I screamed, but the sound seemed muted, absorbed by the rock around me. Hands touched me, cold, dry hands that felt like leather, grabbing my arms, my shoulders, pulling me down toward the floor of the chamber. "Join us," voices whispered from all directions. "Stay with us. The mine keeps us all. The mine keeps everyone." I fought, thrashing in the darkness, but there were too many hands, too many voices. I felt myself being dragged across the rough stone floor, dragged toward one of the side tunnels. They were taking me deeper, I realized, pulling me into the mountain where I would never be found, where I would join them in their eternal darkness. Then I heard something else. A sound from far away, muffled by rock, but unmistakable. Voices. Human voices. Living voices. Someone shouting. The ghostly hands released me suddenly, and I heard movement around me, the sense of figures retreating back into their tunnels. Think someone's in there. The voice was clearer now, closer. I heard screaming, "Get the equipment." I scrambled toward where I remembered the collapsed entrance being, feeling my way in the darkness, my hands scraping against rock and timber. "I'm here," I screamed. "I'm alive. I'm in here." The next hours were a blur. A mining rescue team, apparently someone had seen my Jeep and reported it, and when they investigated the old mine, they'd heard the initial collapse, worked to create a small opening through the rubble. They passed through bottles of water, then a flashlight, then finally a respirator mask. It took them 14 hours total to create an opening large enough for me to squeeze through. When I finally emerged into the late afternoon sun, I was covered in dust and blood from a dozen scrapes and cuts, dehydrated, and shaking uncontrollably. The paramedics wanted to take me to the hospital, but I refused. I just wanted to leave, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that mine. The sheriff questioned me while the EMTs checked me over. I told him about the collapse, about being trapped, but I didn't mention the ghosts. Who would believe me? I barely believed it myself. Maybe it had been hallucinations brought on by stress and oxygen deprivation. Maybe my mind had created the miners to cope with the terror of being buried alive. That's what I told myself anyway. But I know what I experienced. I know what I felt in that darkness. And I know that when the rescue team went back in to assess the damage and document the collapse, they found something in one of the side chambers. 12 skeletons in rotted mining clothes, arranged in a circle around an old ore cart, exactly where they died in the 1894 cave-in. The bodies had never been recovered. The mine had kept them, just like the ghost told me. I never photographed another abandoned place. I sold my camera equipment and went back to school, got my teaching certificate, found a normal job in a normal city. But I still have nightmares about the darkness, about those cold hands pulling me deeper into the mountain. And sometimes, when I'm in a basement, or a parking garage, or anywhere underground, I hear it. The sound of boots on stone, the scraping of metal, the whispers of voices that shouldn't exist. The Vulture mine is still there, still abandoned, still hungry. They sealed that adit properly after my rescue, but there are others. There are always others, and deep in the mountain, in the darkness where no light ever reaches, 12 miners still wait, still watch, still pull the unwary deeper into the earth. I was lucky. I was given a choice: stay in the darkness forever, or return to the light but carry the darkness with me always. I chose life. But part of me never left that mine. Part of me is still there, trapped in that moment when the light died and the cold hands found me in the dark. Some nights, I wonder if I made the right choice. The blood in the old jail cell was fresh, and I knew with absolute certainty that whoever left it there was still watching me from somewhere in the darkness. By the time I realized I wasn't photographing wildlife anymore, I was documenting a crime scene. It was already too late to leave quietly. My name is Holden, and in March of 2015, I was a 43-year-old wildlife photographer working on a project documenting desert predators along the Arizona-Mexico border. I'd spent the better part of 2 years capturing images of mountain lions, coyotes, and javelinas in their natural habitat, using motion-triggered cameras and spending long nights in blinds waiting for the perfect shot. Ruby Ghost Town, located just a few miles north of the Mexican border in Santa Cruz County, seemed like the perfect location for my next overnight shoot. The town had been remarkably well preserved, with several buildings still standing, and the surrounding desert was known for active wildlife corridors. I'd done my research. Ruby had a dark history: the murders of John and Alexander Fraser in 1920, followed by the Pierce family killings in 1921. The town never recovered from those tragedies, and by the 1940s it was completely abandoned. Now it existed in a strange liminal space, privately owned but occasionally opened for tours, situated in an area known for drug and human trafficking due to its proximity to the border. I'd gotten permission from the property owners to spend a night there for photography purposes, assuring them I'd stay out of the buildings and focus on the surrounding landscape. I arrived just before sunset, my truck loaded with camera equipment, camping gear, and enough water and supplies for 3 days if needed. The drive in was rough, 10 miles of dirt road that required 4-wheel drive and careful navigation. Ruby sat in a valley surrounded by rocky hills dotted with mesquite and ocotillo, the kind of landscape that looks beautiful in golden hour, but hostile once the sun goes down. I set up my base camp near the old schoolhouse, a relatively intact structure that would provide some windbreak. My plan was simple: set up motion cameras at several locations around the ghost town, then settle in for the night with my main camera and telephoto lens, ready to capture any nocturnal animals that ventured through. I'd done this dozens of times in other locations. It was methodical, peaceful work that required patience and respect for the environment. As the sun dropped below the hills, I made a circuit of the town, placing cameras near the mine superintendent's house, the jail, the assay office, and the general store. Ruby was eerily quiet. No wind, no birds, just the fading light painting everything in shades of orange and purple. The jail caught my attention because the door was slightly open, which seemed odd given how well preserved the other buildings were. I made a mental note to check it in the morning when I retrieved my cameras. Full. Darkness came quickly, as it always does in the desert. I settled into my camping chair with a thermos of coffee, my main camera on a tripod beside me, night vision scope attached. The temperature dropped rapidly. March nights in southern Arizona can dip into the 40s, and I pulled on an extra fleece layer. Above me, stars emerged in impossible numbers, the Milky Way a bright slash across the black sky. Around 10 p.m., I saw the lights, vehicle headlights, maybe 2 or 3 trucks, moving without any kind of road on the Mexican side of the border, maybe a mile south of my position. They were moving slowly, methodically, and they didn't stay on for long, just brief flashes, like someone was using them to navigate particularly rough terrain. I watched through my telephoto lens, my photographer's instinct kicking in despite the situation making me uneasy. The truck stopped. The lights went out. I couldn't see anything after that, but I heard voices carrying across the still desert air. Spanish, too distant to make out individual words, but the tone was harsh, urgent. Then silence. Whatever those trucks were doing, they'd finished. I knew I should probably pack up and leave. This was clearly not wildlife activity, and I was uncomfortably close to what could be cartel operations. But I hesitated. I had expensive equipment set up all around the ghost town, cameras that had cost thousands of dollars, and technically, I was on private property with permission. The trucks were in Mexico, not my concern. I decided I'd retrieve my cameras first thing at dawn and clear out before full daylight. That decision almost got me killed. Around midnight, I heard footsteps, boots on gravel, moving through the ghost town from the south. Multiple people, trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding. I killed my headlamp immediately and crouched behind the schoolhouse wall, my heart hammering. The footsteps came closer, and I heard low voices speaking Spanish. 3 men, maybe 4, moving between the buildings. Through a gap in the schoolhouse wall, I could see them briefly as they passed through a patch of moonlight. Men in dark clothing, 2 of them carrying what looked like rifles, moving with purpose toward the jail building. The one I'd noted earlier with the door slightly open. They went inside. I heard the sound of something heavy being moved, scraping across the floor. They were inside for maybe 10 minutes, then emerged and headed back the way they'd come, south toward Mexico. I stayed frozen behind that wall for another 30 minutes after they left, barely breathing, before I finally worked up the courage to move. Every instinct screamed at me to get in my truck and leave immediately, but one of my cameras was mounted right outside the jail. If they'd seen it, if they'd taken it, the camera's GPS metadata could potentially be traced back to me. I needed to know. I grabbed my flashlight and, keeping the beam low, made my way to the jail. The door was open wider now. I should have walked away. I should have sacrificed the camera. But professional habit overrode common sense, and I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Metallic, organic, wrong. My flashlight beam swept across the small interior space, and I saw it immediately. Blood. Fresh blood, still wet, pooled on the floor near the old iron bars that had once held prisoners. A lot of blood. More than I'd ever seen outside of a butcher shop, and on the wall smeared handprints, like someone had tried to push themselves up and failed. My camera was still there, mounted on its tripod outside the opposite window, undisturbed. But now I understood what I'd witnessed. Those men hadn't been trafficking drugs or people. They'd been disposing of a body, and the jail, with its thick walls and remote location, was their dumping ground. I heard the truck engines before I saw the lights. They were coming back, coming from the south, moving faster now, headlights bouncing crazily over the rough terrain. They were heading straight for Ruby. I ran, not back to my campsite. That was too exposed, too obvious, but toward the mine superintendent's house, a 2-story structure with multiple rooms and places to hide. I burst through the door and took the stairs 2 at a time, finding a small closet on the 2nd floor. I wedged myself inside, pulled the door almost closed, and tried to control my breathing. The trucks roared into Ruby. I heard doors slamming, men shouting in Spanish. Through the gap in the closet door, I could see flashlight beams sweeping through the lower floor of the house. They were searching for me. "Hey, equipo de camping aquí," someone yelled. They'd found my camp. They knew someone was here. "Encuéntralo." Another voice, deeper, angrier. "Find him." Footsteps on the stairs. Multiple people spreading out through the 2nd floor. I pressed myself against the back wall of the closet, making myself as small as possible. A flashlight beam swept past the door once, twice. Someone tried the handle of the room I was in. The door creaked open. I could see him through the crack in the closet door. Young, maybe mid-20s, holding a pistol in one hand and a flashlight in the other. He swept the beam across the empty room, lingered on the closet door. Time stretched out, each second lasting an eternity. He took a step toward the closet. "Aquí no hay nada," someone called from another room. "Nothing here." The young man hesitated, then turned and left. I heard them moving through the rest of the house, then back downstairs, then outside. Angry voices arguing about something. An engine started, then another. The trucks drove away, heading back south. I stayed in that closet until the sun came up. I didn't move, barely breathed, convinced they'd left someone behind to watch for me. When dawn finally broke and birds began their morning calls, I crept out of the house and back to my campsite. Everything was gone. My tent, my supplies, my camping gear, all of it loaded into their trucks and taken away. The only things left were my truck keys, which I'd kept in my pocket, and the cameras I'd hidden around the ghost town. Moving quickly, systematically, I retrieved all 5 cameras and threw them in my truck. The one outside the jail showed exactly what I'd feared. 4 men carrying a body wrapped in plastic, placing it in the jail, then leaving. 40 minutes later, footage of the same men returning, searching the area with flashlights. I didn't stop driving until I reached Tucson, 2 hours north. I went straight to the nearest federal building and asked to speak to Border Patrol. The agent I spoke with, a woman named Violet Martinez, listened to my story without interruption, then asked to see the camera footage. "We're going to need to keep this equipment," she said, after reviewing the files, "and we're going to need you to make a formal statement. Do you understand that you may have witnessed cartel activity, that these people may try to find you?" I understood. I spent the next 6 hours giving my statement, describing everything I'd seen and heard. Agent Martinez made arrangements for my truck to be searched and documented. When I finally left the federal building, she gave me her card and a warning. Whoever these people are, they know someone was there that night. They took your camping gear, which means they know your equipment brands, can maybe estimate how much you spend on outdoor gear. They might assume you're wealthy. They might look for you. I'd recommend staying somewhere unpredictable for the next few weeks. Don't go home directly. Don't maintain your usual routines. I followed her advice. I stayed with friends in Phoenix, then spent 2 weeks with my sister in California. When I finally returned home to Tucson, I found that my house had been broken into. Nothing was taken, and that was the most terrifying part. They'd been inside, looked through my things, and left. A message. We know who you are. We know where you live. The authorities found the body 3 weeks later, after obtaining proper warrants and search permissions for Ruby, a Mexican national, mid-30s, who'd been reported missing by his family in Nogales. The investigation led to several arrests on both sides of the border, though I wasn't privy to most of the details. Agent Martinez called once to tell me the case was progressing, but that I should remain vigilant. I never went back to Ruby. I never photographed anywhere near the border again. In fact, I gave up wildlife photography entirely. The risk wasn't worth it anymore. Every shadow could hide someone watching. Every vehicle behind me on a lonely road could be following. The desert, which I'd loved for its harsh beauty and isolation, now represented only danger. Sometimes I think about that night, about the moment I chose to check the jail instead of leaving immediately, about the young man with the pistol standing 3 feet away from my hiding place, about how close I came to becoming another body wrapped in plastic. The margins were so thin. One different decision, one unlucky moment, and I would have disappeared into the desert, just another statistic in the endless border violence. The cameras are in an evidence locker somewhere, probably still there, documentation of crimes I never wanted to witness. My camping gear is gone, either destroyed or being used by the men who took it. And Ruby still sits in that valley, preserved and empty, its dark history continuing in ways the tourists who visit during daylight hours will never know. I live in Oregon now, as far from the border as I could manage while staying in the western United States. I photograph city parks and suburban wildlife, squirrels, raccoons, the occasional deer, safe subjects, safe locations, places where the only danger is an angry goose or a parking ticket. My friends don't understand why I gave up the work I loved, why I left Arizona so suddenly. I tell them I needed a change, wanted a different climate, missed the green of the Northwest. I don't tell them the truth, that I'm still afraid, that I still check over my shoulder in parking lots, that I still wake up from nightmares where I'm trapped in that closet, watching the flashlight beams sweep closer, knowing that this time the young man will open the door and find me. Rubia remembers its murders from 1920 and 1921, the ones that made history. But it keeps newer secrets too, buried in its jail, hidden in its shadows. The ghost town isn't just haunted by the past. It's still being used by the living, still witnessing violence, still keeping score. And somewhere south of the border, or maybe north of it now, men in dark clothing remember the photographer who saw too much. They remember his camping gear, his expensive cameras, the evidence he gave to federal agents. They remember, and they're patient, and they're watching. I just hope they never find me. The photograph showed 17 figures standing behind me in the Chloride cemetery, but when I took that picture, I was completely alone. By the time I realized what I'd captured, 3 days had passed. 3 days I have no memory of whatsoever. My name is Tripp, and in November of 2022, I was a 55-year-old historical researcher specializing in Arizona mining disasters. I'd spent the better part of my career documenting forgotten tragedies, compiling records of men who died in cave-ins, explosions, and accidents that never made it into official histories. It was solitary work, requiring long hours in dusty archives and longer days visiting remote locations where these disasters occurred. I preferred it that way. After my wife passed from cancer in 2019, I found comfort in the company of the dead. They asked nothing of me, judged nothing, simply waited to have their stories told. Chloride, a semi-ghost town in Mojave County, caught my attention because of a particular incident from 1899. According to fragmentary newspaper accounts, 12 miners died in a single day at the Silver Hill mine, not from a collapse or explosion, but from what the papers euphemistically called mountain fever. Modern interpretation suggested carbon monoxide poisoning, but something about the reports felt off. The descriptions of the victims' behavior before death, disorientation, speaking to people who weren't there, walking in circles, didn't quite match CO poisoning symptoms. I arrived in Chloride on a Thursday afternoon in early November. The town sat at 4,000 feet elevation in the Surbat Mountains, still inhabited by about 250 people who appreciated the isolation and Old West atmosphere. The historic cemetery occupied a hillside east of town, overlooking the valley below. That's where I needed to be. Several of the 1899 victims were buried there, and I wanted photographs of their headstones for my research. The cemetery was larger than I expected, spreading across the rocky hillside in irregular sections. Many graves dated back to the 1860s, marked by simple wooden crosses or plain stones with names barely legible after a century and a half of exposure. I found the 1899 section in the northeast corner, 12 graves arranged in 2 neat rows, all bearing the same death date, November 3rd, 1899. I photographed each headstone, noting names and any other inscribed information. Most were simple: name, birth year, death date, but 2 stones bore additional inscriptions. The first read, Metcalf Baker, the mountain took him. The second, Andrew Judson, he saw what was coming. Both men had been in their early 30s when they died. Both stones looked older than they should, weathered beyond what 123 years would explain. The temperature dropped as I worked, the November sun providing little warmth this late in the afternoon. By 4 p.m., long shadows stretched across the cemetery, and I decided to take one final photograph, a wide shot of the entire 12-grave section for context. I positioned myself with my back to the valley, framing all 12 stones in the viewfinder, and pressed the shutter. That's when things became strange. The moment the shutter clicked, I felt it. A sensation like stepping from a warm room into a walk-in freezer. The temperature plummeted so quickly I could see my breath fogging in front of me. The air felt wrong, thick and resistant, like trying to breathe through wet cotton. And the light changed. The sun was still visible, still in the same position, but the quality of light had shifted, become flatter, grayer, less substantial. I looked down at my camera's LCD screen to review the photo I'd just taken. The image showed the 12 graves clearly, but something was wrong with the composition. The shadows fell at the wrong angle, and in the background, standing among the graves in positions where no one had been moments before, were people. 17 figures in dark clothing, all facing the camera, all facing me. I spun around. The cemetery was empty. Just graves and scrub brush and the rocky hillside. No people. No one at all. I looked back at the camera screen. The 17 figures remained, perfectly clear in the digital image. Men in mining clothes, women in long dresses, even 2 children. All with faces I couldn't quite focus on. The features were there, but somehow slid away from comprehension every time I tried to look directly at them. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the camera. I needed to leave. This was wrong, fundamentally wrong in a way my rational mind couldn't process, but my instincts screamed about. I started walking back toward my rental car, parked on the dirt road below the cemetery. Except I couldn't find the road. I walked in the direction I knew it had to be, downhill, west, away from the cemetery. But after 5 minutes of walking, I was still surrounded by graves. Different graves now, sections I hadn't seen before. The cemetery seemed to have expanded, grown into something vast and labyrinthine. The sun hung in the same position it had been, not moving, frozen in that late afternoon slant. I tried to retrace my steps, return to the 1899 section where I'd started. But the graves around me kept changing. I'd pass a distinctive monument, an angel with broken wings, a Celtic cross, an obelisk, and then 3 minutes later, I'd pass the same monument again, from a different direction. The cemetery was looping, folding in on itself, trapping me in its boundaries. That's when I heard the voices, singing. A hymn I didn't recognize, in harmonies that hurt to listen to because they contain too many notes, chords that shouldn't be possible with human voices. The singing came from everywhere and nowhere, and it was getting closer. I started running, abandoning any sense of direction, just trying to find something familiar, some landmark that would orient me. The graves blurred past, names and dates merging into an endless litany of the dead. The singing grew louder, and beneath it, I heard other sounds. Pickaxes striking stone, timber supports creaking, men shouting warnings in the darkness of a mine shaft. I rounded a large tombstone and nearly collided with him. A man in mining clothes, his face covered in rock dust, his eyes completely black, from edge to edge with no whites visible. He stood perfectly still, blocking my path, and when he spoke, his voice echoed, as if coming from a great distance. "You're researching us," he said. It wasn't a question. "You want to know what happened in the Silver Hill. You want to document our deaths. Would you like to experience them instead?" "No," I managed to say. "I just want to leave. I'll go. I won't bother." "Too late," another voice said from behind me. I turned to find a woman in a high-necked dress, her skin gray as cemetery stones. "You asked the mountain for her secrets. She's showing you. She's generous that way." More figures appeared, emerging from behind tombstones or simply materializing in empty spaces. The 17 from my photograph, and dozens more. The cemetery was full of the dead, all watching me with varying expressions: curiosity, hunger, pity, rage. They formed a loose circle around me, neither advancing nor retreating, just watching. "The mountain fever wasn't fever," the miner said. "It was the mountain herself, speaking to us, showing us things. The silver we pulled from her veins, she wanted it back. She showed us where we'd failed her, showed us our deaths before they happened. Andrew Judson, he saw it clearest. Went mad trying to warn the others. Metcalf Baker tried to run, but the mountain took him anyway. Took all 12 of us in one day. Our bodies went into the ground, but our spirits..." He gestured at the cemetery around us. "We never left. And anyone who comes looking for our stories, well, the mountain shows them too." The singing reached a crescendo, became unbearable. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside my head, resonating in my bones. The world began to tilt, the graves sliding sideways, the sky rotating overhead. I felt myself falling, but in every direction simultaneously, tumbling through a space that had too many dimensions. And then nothing. A gap, a void, a space where memory should be, but isn't. I woke up in my rental car 3 days later, Sunday afternoon, November 6th, 2022, according to my phone. I was parked on a residential street in Kingman, 20 miles north of Chloride, with no recollection of how I'd gotten there. My camera was in the passenger seat. My research notebook was gone, and I was wearing different clothes than I'd worn on Thursday. A flannel shirt and jeans I didn't recognize, and that didn't fit quite right. The last photograph on my camera was the wide shot of the 12 graves with the 17 figures standing among them. Everything after that, the next 3 days, was simply missing. My phone showed no calls, no texts, no activity. My credit card showed no charges. I'd used no gas. For 72 hours, I'd apparently existed in some state that left no digital footprint whatsoever. I drove immediately to a hospital in Kingman, told them I'd had some kind of episode, possibly a seizure or stroke. They ran every test available. CT scan, MRI, blood work, EEG, everything came back normal. No signs of neurological damage, no drugs or toxins in my system, no explanation for my missing 3 days. The police were less helpful. I filed a missing persons report on myself, trying to explain what happened, but the detective assigned to my case clearly thought I was either lying or mentally ill. "You're here now, unharmed, in your own rental car with all your possessions except a notebook," she said. "There's no crime to investigate. People have gaps in memory sometimes. Stress, alcohol, prescription interactions. It happens." But I knew it wasn't any of those things. I knew what I'd seen, what I'd experienced in that cemetery. The mountain had shown me something, pulled me into something, and then released me 3 days later with no explanation. I tried to continue my research, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. I couldn't look at historical records without wondering what ghosts I might be disturbing, what doors I might be opening. I especially couldn't bring myself to finish the Silver Hill Mine project. Those 12 men in the Chloride cemetery had their story documented already, in ways far more permanent than any research paper I could write. What disturbs me most isn't the missing 3 days, though that's terrifying enough. It's what I found when I finally worked up the courage to look more carefully at that photograph. I zoomed in on the 17 figures, examining each face despite how they seemed to slide away from focus. And in the back row, partially obscured by the others, I saw myself. Same age, same features, wearing the exact flannel shirt and jeans I'd woken up in on Sunday. That version of me in the photograph is smiling. Not a happy smile, but the expression of someone who knows a secret they'll never share. And in my hands, he's holding a notebook that looks exactly like the one I lost. I still have the photograph. I've never shown it to anyone, never published my research on the Silver Hill mine disaster. Sometimes, late at night, I zoom in on that image of myself, standing among the 17 dead, and I wonder, what did I do during those 3 days? Where did I go? What did the mountain show me that my conscious mind couldn't retain? And most terrifying of all, did I ever really leave that cemetery? Or is the person typing these words now just another echo, another ghost walking through a life that's already ended, documenting the dead because I'm one of them? The Chloride Cemetery still stands on its hillside, overlooking the valley, keeping its secrets. The 12 miners from 1899 rest in their neat rows, their stories, unfinished and untold. And somewhere in that cemetery, according to a photograph I can't delete and can't look away from, a version of me stands among the dead, smiling that secret smile, holding a notebook I'll never read. I don't go to cemeteries anymore. I don't research mining disasters. I barely leave my apartment in Phoenix, where I've surrounded myself with the noise and light and constant presence of the living. But on quiet nights, when the city sounds fade and the darkness presses close, I hear it, that impossible hymn with too many notes, the sound of pickaxes striking stone, and beneath it all the mountain, speaking in a language I understood for 3 days but can no longer remember. The mountain is patient, the dead are patient. And somewhere in Chloride, in a cemetery I'll never visit again, 17 figures wait among the graves, ready to welcome the next researcher who comes looking for their stories. I just hope whoever comes next doesn't look at their photographs too carefully. I hope they don't zoom in on the faces, because if they do, they might see themselves staring back, wearing that same secret smile, holding evidence of days they haven't lived yet but somehow already have. The mountain shows you your story before you live it. That's what Andrew Judson discovered in 1899. That's what I learned in 2022. And that's the warning I can't quite bring myself to share, because who would believe me? Who would understand that some deaths happen long before the body stops moving? That some ghosts walk around for years before they realize they're haunting their own lives? I'm 55 years old. I'm alive and well in Phoenix. I'm writing these words on a Sunday afternoon in late 2024, and I'm also standing in the Chloride cemetery, frozen in a photograph from November 2022, waiting among the dead with a smile I don't remember making and knowledge I can't access. Time in the mountain doesn't work the way it does out here. The dead don't stay buried. And some questions once asked can never be unasked. The Silver Hill mine claimed 12 men in 1899. The Chloride cemetery claimed me in 2022. How many others it's claimed, how many other researchers and visitors and curious souls, I'll never know. But they're all there, in photographs people take without realizing what they're capturing, standing among the graves, smiling those secret smiles, waiting for the living to notice them and understand. The cemetery never lets you leave. You just don't realize you've stayed. They found me 15 miles from where I started, naked and delirious. My skin burned so badly the EMTs couldn't understand how I was still conscious. What I told them in the ambulance, what I swear I experienced in that desert, the doctors attributed to severe heat exhaustion and hallucinations. But I know the difference between a dream and walking through hell itself. July 17, 2017. The temperature in Swansea, Arizona hit 117 degrees by noon, and I was hiking through it like an idiot. My name is Kyle, 28 years old at the time, and I thought I was taking a shortcut. I'd been backpacking solo through western Arizona for 3 weeks, documenting the trip for a travel blog that had maybe 200 followers. Young, stupid, and convinced I was invincible. That pretty much sums up who I was back then. I'd camped near Bouse the night before and decided to cut across the desert toward Parker instead of following Highway 72. On my map, it looked like maybe 12 miles as the crow flies versus 20-something following the road. I had 3 liters of water, a GPS unit, my backpack with camping gear, and the absolute certainty that I knew better than every hiking guide that said never ever hike the Arizona desert in July. The first hour wasn't bad. The sun was still low, temperature maybe 95, and I made good time across the scrubby terrain. I could see Swansea in the distance, the old smelter, the scattered ruins of buildings, the tailings piles from decades of copper mining. The ghost town sat in a valley between rocky hills, and I figured I'd take a break there, get some shade in one of the structures, then push on to Parker in the afternoon. By hour 2, the temperature had climbed past 105, and I'd already gone through 1 liter of water. The landscape had started doing that shimmer thing, heat waves rising off the rocks and making everything look liquid and unstable. I kept checking my GPS, watching the little arrow creep slowly toward Swansea. 3 more miles. I could do 3 more miles. That's when I started seeing them. Figures in the distance, walking parallel to my route. At first, I thought they were other hikers, maybe people visiting the ghost town. But something was off about the way they moved. Too fluid, too fast, covering ground that should have taken twice as long. And they were wearing the wrong clothes. Long sleeves, heavy pants, the kind of work clothes miners wore 100 years ago. I stopped, pulled out my binoculars. The figures were gone, just empty desert, rocks and creosote bushes and heat shimmer. I drank some water, told myself I was seeing things, and kept walking. The sun climbed higher. The temperature climbed with it. By the time I reached Swansea, I'd finished my 2nd liter. My head was pounding, my vision had started to narrow at the edges, and my legs felt like they were made of concrete. The ghost town offered some relief. Shade from the partial walls of the old buildings, a break from the relentless sun. I found a spot inside what used to be the assay office, collapsed against a wall, and tried to rest. The town was silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and the creak of old timber in the heat. I closed my eyes for what felt like a minute. When I opened them, the sun had moved. An hour had passed, maybe more, and I had no memory of it. My last water bottle was empty. I didn't remember drinking it. Panic started then. Real panic. Not the mild anxiety of being uncomfortable, but the deep animal fear of knowing you've made a fatal mistake. I was 12 miles from the highway with no water in 115-degree heat. My GPS showed I'd come less than 6 miles. I'd miscalculated the distance, miscalculated the terrain, miscalculated everything. People died in situations like this. People died regularly. I forced myself to stand, to move, to start walking toward where I thought the highway should be. North. I needed to go north. But when I stepped out of the building, I couldn't tell which way was north anymore. The sun was directly overhead, offering no clues. My GPS showed the blue arrow pointing one direction, but when I started walking that way, something felt wrong. The landscape looked the same in every direction, rocks and scrub and heat. That's when I saw him. A man standing maybe 50 yards away, wearing mining clothes, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me. I called out to him, my voice cracking from dehydration. He didn't respond. I started walking toward him, and he turned and walked away, moving deeper into the ghost town. I followed. I know now that was the heat exhaustion making decisions for me, my brain not functioning right, but at the time it seemed logical. The man knew this place. He could help me find water, find the way out. I stumbled through the ruins, chasing a figure that stayed always 50 yards ahead, never closer, never farther. More figures appeared. A woman in a long dress standing in a doorway, children playing near the old smelter, a group of men carrying tools, heading toward the mine entrances that dotted the hillside. They all moved with that same fluid wrongness, and they all ignored me when I called to them. The sun reached its peak, and the desert became an oven. I could feel my skin cooking, blistering under the relentless heat. My tongue had swollen in my mouth, making it hard to breathe. I fell twice, got up both times, kept following the figures that led me deeper into the maze of ruins and mine shafts. At some point, I have no idea when, I entered one of the mine tunnels. It was cooler inside, and the shade felt like salvation. The man in the mining clothes stood at the entrance, gesturing for me to follow, and I did. I crawled into that tunnel on my hands and knees, desperate for relief from the heat. The tunnel went down, angling into the hillside. Old timbers supported the ceiling, and rail tracks ran along the floor, rusted but still visible in the dim light from the entrance. The man kept walking ahead of me, and I kept following. The temperature dropped with each step deeper. It felt wonderful. It felt like survival. Then I started seeing them. Bodies. Miners who died in collapses or accidents, still lying where they fell. Some were mummified by the dry desert air, skin stretched tight over bones. Others looked fresher, impossibly fresh, as if they died yesterday instead of a century ago. They all watched me as I crawled past, their eyes following my movement. "You're not supposed to be here," one of them said. His jaw didn't move, but I heard his voice clearly. "You're still alive. This is the place of the dead." "I need water," I whispered. "Please, I'm dying." "Not yet," another voice said. "But soon. The desert takes everyone eventually. The mine takes everyone eventually. You can't escape the heat. You can't escape death." The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and I saw them all. Dozens of dead miners sitting in a circle around an old ore cart. They turned to look at me as I entered, their faces showing various stages of decay, and they all spoke at once in a chorus that echoed off the stone walls. "Join us. Stay where it's cool. Stay where the sun can't reach. Stay in the darkness where nothing hurts anymore." I wanted to. Every cell in my body wanted to curl up in that cool chamber and sleep. Sleep forever. Sleep until the heat and pain and fear went away. But some tiny part of my brain, the last rational piece that hadn't been cooked by the sun, screamed at me to run, to get out, to get back to the surface, back to the light, even if the light meant death. I don't remember crawling back through the tunnel. I don't remember emerging into the sunlight. The next thing I remember clearly is walking, no, stumbling, through the desert with no backpack, no clothes, no idea where I was going. just walking because stopping meant death. The sun had become a physical weight pressing down on me, and the ground underneath me felt wrong, spongy, and unstable. Time stopped meaning anything. I might have walked for hours or days. The landscape kept repeating, the same rocks, the same bushes, the same shimmer of heat. I saw things that couldn't be real, oceans of water that vanished when I got close, cities rising from the desert floor, my dead grandmother sitting on a rock asking me why I was naked. At some point, I fell and couldn't get up. I lay on my back, staring at the white-hot sky, feeling my body shutting down, system by system. My skin had stopped sweating. I was too dehydrated to produce moisture. My vision had tunneled to a tiny point of light surrounded by darkness. My heartbeat felt irregular, stuttering in my chest. I was dying. I knew it with absolute certainty. In a few minutes, or maybe seconds, my heart would stop, my brain would cease functioning, and I would become another body in the Arizona desert. Another statistic of someone who underestimated the heat. Then I heard the helicopter. The thwop, thwop, thwop of rotors, cutting through air, getting closer. A shadow passed over me, blessed relief from the sun. Voices shouting, hands touching me, lifting me. The cool interior of the helicopter, someone pressing an oxygen mask to my face, someone else starting an IV in my arm. Jesus Christ, he's completely naked, one of the EMTs said. Skin temp is 108. How is he conscious? Kyle, another voice said, close to my ear. Kyle, can you hear me? You're safe now. We're taking you to the hospital. You're going to be okay. I wanted to tell them about the miners, about the tunnel, about the bodies watching me in the darkness. But my mouth wouldn't form words. And the darkness that had been creeping at the edges of my vision finally swallowed everything. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Lake Havasu City. The doctors told me I had third-degree burns over 60% of my body. My core temperature had been 107.6 when they brought me in, and I'd been maybe 20 minutes from complete organ failure. They'd found me 15 miles from Swansea, walking in circles, and they had no idea how I'd survived as long as I did with no water, no protection from the sun, and in that heat. When I asked about my gear, they said they'd found none of it. No backpack, no clothes, no water bottles. The search and rescue team had gone back to look for my stuff, thinking it might help them trace my route, but they'd found nothing. It was like I'd walked into the desert fully equipped, and everything had simply vanished. I told them about the miners, about the tunnel, about following the man in the mining clothes. They nodded sympathetically and made notes about hallucinations consistent with severe heat exhaustion. They explained that my brain, desperate to escape the reality of dying from heat, had created elaborate scenarios to cope with the trauma. The tunnel, the cool darkness, the bodies, all hallucinations designed to give me hope, to keep me moving when my body wanted to shut down. But I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. And when they finally released me after 6 weeks of treatment for my burns, I went back to Swansea with a guide, proper equipment, and plenty of water. I needed to see if the tunnel was real. We found it. The entrance was partially collapsed, but it was there, exactly where I remembered. The guide, a local guy named Quinn, who knew all the old mining sites, refused to let me go inside. That tunnel's unstable, he said. Nobody's been in there for decades, probably longer. How did you even know it was here? I didn't answer. I couldn't explain that I'd followed a dead miner into that tunnel, that I'd seen bodies that couldn't possibly still exist. Instead, I took photographs of the entrance, of the surrounding area, trying to document what I'd experienced. That night, reviewing the photos on my laptop, I saw something that made my blood run cold, despite the room being perfectly temperature-controlled. In one of the photos, taken at the tunnel entrance, there were figures. Faint, almost transparent, but definitely there. Men in mining clothes standing in and around the tunnel entrance, watching the camera, watching me. I never went back to Arizona. I moved to Seattle, where the temperature barely breaks 80 degrees even in summer, where rain is abundant, and the idea of dying from heat seems absurd. I don't hike anymore, don't travel to remote places, don't do anything that puts me at the mercy of nature. But I still have the burns. The scars cover my chest, my arms, my legs, a permanent reminder of the day I walked through 117-degree heat with no water and survived something I shouldn't have. The doctors call it a miracle. They write about me in medical journals, trying to understand how I lasted so long in conditions that should have killed me in hours. I know the truth. I survived because the dead miners led me in circles. They kept me close to Swansea, close to where search and rescue would eventually find me, even though it felt like I was walking for miles. They led me into their cool tunnel to save me from the worst of the afternoon heat, then pushed me back out into the sun when the helicopter was close enough to spot me. The dead in Swansea, they're not malevolent. They're just lonely. They died in the heat and the darkness, and they stay there, trapped between the burning desert and the cool mines, unable to leave, unable to rest. They see the living sometimes, and they try to help, even when their help comes in the form of hallucinations that blur the line between salvation and madness. I dream about them sometimes. Not nightmares exactly, just dreams where I'm back in that tunnel, sitting in the circle with the dead miners, and they're teaching me something I can't quite remember when I wake up. They're showing me how to survive in impossible heat, how to walk through fire and emerge alive, how to exist in that space between living and dying where they've been stuck for over a century. My therapist says it's PTSD, my brain trying to process the trauma by creating narratives that give it meaning. Maybe she's right. Maybe the miners aren't real, weren't real, never existed outside my overheated, dying brain. Maybe the tunnel was just a tunnel, the bodies just shadows and rock formations, the voices just the sound of my own thoughts as I slipped closer to death. But I still have the photograph, the one with the figures standing at the tunnel entrance. I've shown it to experts, photography professors, paranormal investigators, even a forensic analyst. Most say it's just pareidolia, my brain finding human shapes in random shadows and textures. But one investigator, an older woman named Anaya, who'd been studying Arizona ghost towns for 40 years, looked at it for a long time before speaking. "That's them," she finally said. "The Swansea dead. They don't show up in photos often, but when they do, it means they've chosen you for something. You're marked now. They saved you for a reason." "What reason?" I asked. She shrugged. "Maybe they're tired of being forgotten. Maybe they want their stories told. Or maybe they just saw someone who reminded them of themselves when they were alive. Young, foolish, certain they could conquer the desert. Maybe they saved you so you could live the life they didn't get to finish." I think about that a lot. I think about the miners who died in the heat and the darkness, who stayed in Swansea for over a century, who reached out across the veil between life and death to guide a stupid kid through the worst mistake of his life. I think about owing my life to people who have no lives left of their own. So I'm telling their story now. I'm documenting what happened in that desert, in that ghost town, in that tunnel that shouldn't have saved me but did. Maybe that's what they wanted all along, to be remembered, to have someone bear witness to their existence, even in death. The desert is still there. Swansea is still there. And the miners are still there, waiting in the cool darkness of their tunnels, watching over the ruins of the town they built and died for. They're patient. They've been patient for over 100 years, and they're ready to help the next lost soul who wanders into their domain, ready to guide them through the killing heat, ready to show them the way to survival, even if it means walking through a nightmare to get there. I survived Swansea, but I'm not sure I ever really left. What I saw in Canyon Diablo that night in September 2010 happened 130 years before I was born. The bullet that killed the man in front of me was fired in 1880, but I felt the wind from it pass my face, and I smelled the gunpowder, and when his blood splattered across the dirt, it splattered on my boots too. My name is Jackson, and back then I was 45 years old, driving an 18-wheeler from Flagstaff to Gallup along I-40. I'd been hauling freight for 22 years, knew every truck stop and rest area from California to Texas, and I'd driven through Canyon Diablo, or what's left of it, dozens of times without giving it a second thought. It's barely a landmark now, just a few ruins north of the interstate near Two Guns, another forgotten Arizona ghost town that tourists drive past at 80 miles an hour without noticing. That September night was different. I was running behind schedule because of a breakdown in Flagstaff, and by the time I got back on the road, it was past midnight. The load wasn't urgent. Auto parts headed to Albuquerque, but I had another pickup scheduled for 7 a.m., which meant I needed to make time. I'd been driving for 6 hours straight, and the fatigue was starting to hit hard. My eyes kept losing focus, and twice I'd caught myself drifting toward the shoulder. I needed to stop. Just for 20 minutes, enough to clear my head and maybe grab some coffee from the thermos. The problem was, there's not much between Flagstaff and Winslow at that time of night. A few exits with nothing but darkness, and maybe a closed gas station. But I remembered seeing a dirt road that led to the old Canyon Diablo ruins, accessible from the frontage road that parallels the interstate. It would be quiet, isolated, perfect for a quick rest. I took the exit and followed the frontage road until I found the turnoff, barely visible in my headlights. The dirt road was rough, washboard surface that rattled my rig, but passable. After maybe a quarter mile, the road opened into a flat area near what remained of Canyon Diablo's main street. I could see the outlines of collapsed buildings in my headlights, stone walls, timber frames, the skeleton of a town that had been wild and violent in the 1880s when the railroad came through. I parked the rig, killed the engine, and sat in the cab with my coffee. The silence was absolute. No traffic noise from the interstate, no wind, nothing. Just darkness and ruins and the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. I'd been in plenty of isolated places over the years. Truck stops in the middle of nowhere, rest areas surrounded by empty desert. But something about this felt different. The air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't name. I was about to start the engine again, forget the rest, and just push through to Winslow when I heard it. Music. Faint at first, like it was coming from far away, but definitely music. A piano, playing something upbeat, ragtime maybe. And beneath it, voices, laughter, the sound of a crowd. I opened the door and stepped out of the cab, listening. The music was clearer now, coming from the direction of the ruins, and there were lights. Actual lights, warm and flickering like oil lamps, illuminating windows that shouldn't have windows anymore, in buildings that shouldn't have roofs. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward the sounds. Every rational part of my brain told me to get back in the truck and leave, but curiosity overrode caution. Maybe there were people there, squatters, or kids having a party in the ruins. Maybe I was more tired than I thought and seeing things. But the music was real. The voices were real. And as I got closer, I could make out individual sounds, glass clinking, boots on wooden floors, a woman laughing. I rounded the corner of a half-collapsed wall and stopped dead. The street was full of people. Men in cowboy hats and work clothes, women in long dresses, all moving between buildings that were suddenly intact, complete with porches and hitching posts and horses tied up along the street. The saloon, just a pile of rubble when I'd parked, was now a full 2-story building with light pouring from its windows and doors. I stood frozen, my flashlight pointing at the ground, watching impossible things happen in front of me. A man walked past me close enough to touch, tipped his hat to someone across the street, and kept walking. He didn't see me. None of them saw me. I was a ghost in their world, invisible to this crowded street scene from 1880. The date came to me without knowing why I knew it. 1880, late September. The railroad construction crews were still working the gorge, and Canyon Diablo was in its prime, meaner than Tombstone, more violent than Dodge City, a place where men died over card games and petty insults, where law enforcement was whatever the biggest gun in the room decided it should be. I started walking down the street, moving through crowds that parted around me without acknowledging my presence. I could hear conversations, arguments about money, crude jokes, negotiations for services I won't repeat. The smell was overwhelming. Unwashed bodies, horse manure, whiskey, tobacco smoke, and underneath it all, something metallic that I recognized as fear. Everyone here was armed. Everyone here looked capable of violence. The saloon doors were open, and I walked inside without thinking about what I was doing. The interior was packed, maybe 40 men standing around tables sitting at the bar, playing cards in the corner. The piano player banged out a tune while a woman in a gaudy dress sang something bawdy that made the crowd laugh. I moved through the room like a ghost, studying faces, trying to understand what I was witnessing. That's when I saw him. A young man, maybe 25, sitting alone at a table near the back. He looked different from the others, cleaner, wearing a suit that marked him as not from around here. He was drinking slowly, methodically, like someone trying to work up courage for something difficult. And he kept checking a pocket watch, glancing at it every few minutes, as if waiting for a specific time. I moved closer to him, drawn by something I couldn't explain. As I watched, he closed the pocket watch, drained his whiskey, and stood up. His hand went to his hip, checking that his revolver was there. Then he started walking toward the bar, toward a group of 4 men who were laughing and drinking and completely unaware that death was walking toward them. Everything shifted. The music stopped. The conversations died. The entire saloon turned to watch as the young man in the suit approached the 4 men at the bar. When he spoke, his voice cut through the sudden silence like a knife. "Jack Morrison, you killed my brother in Tucson. You shot him in the back over $20. One of the 4 men at the bar, a big man with a beard and cold eyes, turned slowly. "Your brother cheated at cards. He got what cheaters get. He was unarmed. You shot him in the back." Morrison smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Sounds like I did the world a favor, removing another idiot from the population. Now get out of here, boy, before you join him." The young man's hand moved toward his gun. Morrison was faster. The room exploded in gunfire. 6 shots, maybe 7, so fast they sounded like a string of firecrackers. The young man in the suit fell backward, blood blooming across his chest. But he'd gotten 1 shot off, and Morrison staggered, clutching his throat where a bullet had torn through. Then Morrison's 3 companions opened fire on the young man's body, pumping bullets into him even after he was clearly dead. The muzzle flashes lit up the room in stroboscopic bursts, and the sound was deafening in the enclosed space. I stumbled backward, away from the violence, and felt something wet splash across my face and chest. Blood. The young man's blood sprang from his wounds as the bullets tore through him. I looked down and saw it on my shirt, on my hands, on my boots. Impossible. These were ghosts, echoes, events that happened over a century ago. They shouldn't be able to touch me. But the blood was real, warm and sticky, and the smell of it mixed with the gunpowder smoke made me gag. The saloon erupted in chaos. Men were shouting, drawing their own guns, taking sides or just trying to get out. Morrison collapsed, blood pumping from his throat wound. His 3 companions grabbed his body and dragged him toward the doors. Tables overturned. Someone else started shooting. The piano player dove for cover. I ran. I pushed through the crowd toward the saloon doors, no longer caring that I was shoving through people who shouldn't be able to feel me. Some of them turned to look at me as I passed, and their eyes widened in shock. They could see me now. Whatever barrier had separated our worlds was breaking down. "What the hell is he?" Someone shouted. "He's not right. Look at his clothes." Hands grabbed at me, but I twisted away and burst through the saloon doors into the street. The entire town was in chaos now. People running, shouting, more gunfire erupting from somewhere down the street. I sprinted toward where I'd left my truck, praying it would still be there, praying this nightmare would end. But the truck was gone. The dirt road was gone. I was standing in the middle of an intact Canyon Diablo in 1880, and there was no way back to my own time. I ran anyway, heading out of town toward where I thought the interstate should be. Behind me, I heard horses, men shouting to mount up and chase the stranger. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder. They were coming after me. The landscape was different. No interstate, no power lines, no evidence of the modern world, just desert and rocks and darkness. I kept running, my lungs burning, my legs cramping, expecting any second to feel a bullet slam into my back. Then I saw it. A shimmer in the air ahead of me, like heat waves but vertical, a curtain of distorted space. I didn't slow down, didn't think, just ran straight at it and through it. The sound hit me first, traffic noise, the roar of semis on I-40. Then light, the glow of my own headlights still on, illuminating the ruins of Canyon Diablo in their proper state. Collapsed walls, empty windows, no people, no horses, no saloon. Just a ghost town, dead and silent. I stumbled to my truck and climbed into the cab, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. My CB radio crackled with traffic. Other truckers talking about road conditions, traffic, weather. Normal things, real things. I grabbed the mic. Breaker 19. This is Road Dog eastbound on I-40. Anyone else near Canyon Diablo? Over. Static. Then a voice. That's a 10-4 Road Dog. I'm about 5 miles east of you. What's your 20? Over. I looked at my GPS, confirming my location. I'm at the Canyon Diablo ruins. Did you see anything weird when you passed through? Any lights? Over. A pause. Negative, Road Dog. Dark as pitch out here. You doing okay? You sound rattled. Over. I looked down at my shirt, expecting to see blood. It was clean. My hands were clean. My boots showed no trace of the spatter I'd seen. But when I pulled out my phone and turned on the camera, switching to selfie mode, I saw my face. There was a small cut on my cheek, maybe an inch long, still bleeding slightly. And in the background of the reflection, barely visible in the truck's dome light, I could see something written on my forehead in what looked like blood. Get out. I dropped the phone, started the engine, and got out of there. I drove straight through to Albuquerque without stopping, and I never took that exit again. I still drive the I-40 corridor, but I keep my eyes on the road when I pass Canyon Diablo, and I never, ever stop near those ruins. The cut on my face healed, leaving a scar, the blood on my forehead. I scrubbed it off in a truck stop bathroom an hour later, watching it turn the water red. Real blood, fresh blood. Blood from a murder that happened in 1880 but somehow touched me in 2010. Other drivers have stories about Canyon Diablo. You hear them on the CB sometimes, late at night when everyone's tired and the conversation gets weird. Lights where there shouldn't be lights. Music coming from empty buildings. The sound of gunfire echoing across the desert. Most guys laugh it off, blame it on fatigue or imagination, but some of us know better. Some of us have seen what Canyon Diablo remembers. The town was meaner than Tombstone, more violent than anywhere else in the Old West, and all that violence left an impression. It soaked into the ground, into the stones, into the very air. And on certain nights, under certain conditions, it replays itself. I've tried to research what I saw. The young man in the suit, Jack Morrison, the shooting in the saloon. I found references to a Morrison who died in Canyon Diablo in September 1880, shot in a saloon fight, but the details are vague. Records from that time and place are sparse. The town was too violent, too transient, too mean to bother with things like accurate record keeping. What I know for certain is this. I witnessed a murder from 1880. I felt the blood from that murder splash across my face. And something in that ghost town marked me. wrote a warning on my forehead in the victim's blood telling me I didn't belong there, that I needed to leave before the time slip became permanent. I'm 59 now, still driving, still hauling freight across the Southwest. But I plan my routes carefully, and I never stop in places with violent histories, never rest in ghost towns, never let my curiosity override my caution. Canyon Diablo taught me that the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it replays itself over and over, and sometimes the living get caught in those replays. The scar on my face reminds me every day. Some places remember their sins, and some places will show you those sins whether you want to see them or not. The footage I submitted for my thesis was 47 minutes long, but my camera recorded for 9 hours that night. I've watched what's on those missing 8 hours and 13 minutes exactly once, and I'll never watch it again. Not because of what it shows, but because of what I become in it. My name is Riker, and in April of 2021, I was a 21-year-old film student at the University of Arizona, working on my senior thesis documentary. I'd chosen to focus on Arizona's abandoned mining towns, specifically how these ghost towns function as monuments to industrial capitalism's exploitation and eventual abandonment of both land and labor. Pretentious, I know, but I was 21 and thought I was smarter than I actually was. Total Wreck seemed like the perfect location for my final shoot. Located in Pima County southeast of Tucson, the ghost town got its name from a claim dispute. A miner whose claim was jumped supposedly said it's a total wreck, and the name stuck. The town thrived briefly in the 1880s, produced decent silver and gold, then faded like most mining camps when the ore ran out. By 2021, it was mostly ruins, collapsed buildings, a few standing walls, the old smelter, and several mine entrances that had been partially sealed but remained accessible if you were willing to ignore warning signs. I'd been to Total Wreck twice before during daytime shoots, gotten some good footage of the exteriors, interviewed a local historian about the town's history. But I wanted something more atmospheric, more visceral. I wanted night footage, the ruins lit by portable LED panels, shadows moving across stone walls, the kind of imagery that would make my documentary stand out from every other student film about ghost towns. My professor advised against it. My friends thought I was crazy. Even my girlfriend Stella refused to come with me, said she had a bad feeling about the whole thing. But I was committed. I had a detailed shot list, professional equipment borrowed from the film department, 3 fully charged backup batteries, and the absolute certainty that comes from being young and educated and convinced you can't possibly be wrong about anything. I arrived at Total Wreck around 7 p.m., while there was still some daylight left to set up. I'd planned my shots carefully, establishing shots of the buildings at dusk, then moving inside the old assay office for interior work, finishing with footage at the smelter, where I'd set up multiple lights for dramatic effect. The whole shoot should take 3, maybe 4 hours tops. I'd be back in Tucson by midnight. The setup went smoothly. I positioned my main camera on a tripod for stable shots, carried a handheld for B-roll, set up my LED panels in strategic locations. The assay office had 3 walls still standing and portions of the roof intact, creating interesting shadows and light patterns. Perfect for the aesthetic I wanted. I started filming around 8:30, just after full. Darkness settled. The footage was beautiful, exactly what I'd envisioned. Stone walls catching the harsh LED light, shadows stretching into corners where the ceiling had collapsed. My voiceover explaining how this building represented the administrative backbone of extraction capitalism. I was in my element, moving between shots, adjusting lights, recording different angles. That's when I noticed the sound, a rhythmic clanging, metal on metal, coming from somewhere deeper in the ruins. I stopped filming, listening. The sound continued, steady, methodical, like someone striking a pickaxe against stone. It echoed slightly, suggesting it came from underground, from one of the mine tunnels. I grabbed my handheld camera and followed the sound. This wasn't in my shot list, but good documentarians adapt to unexpected developments. If someone was illegally mining in the tunnels, that would make excellent material for my film's thesis about how capitalism's destructive patterns continue even in abandoned spaces. The sound led me to one of the mine entrances I'd noted on my previous visits. The wooden boards meant to seal it had been pulled aside, leaving an opening large enough to crawl through. The clanging came from inside, louder now, accompanied by other sounds. The creak of timbers, the scrape of metal, voices speaking in low tones. I should have left. Every horror movie I'd ever seen, every cautionary tale about abandoned mines, every ounce of common sense screamed at me to walk away. But the documentary filmmaker in me, the part that wanted an A+ and maybe festival recognition, overrode caution. I checked my camera's battery, turned on its built-in LED light, and crawled into the tunnel. The temperature dropped immediately. The tunnel extended straight back into the mountain, shored up with old timbers that looked disturbingly fragile. The pick-striking sound echoed from deeper in, and I could see light, flickering warm light like oil lamps or candles, illuminating the tunnel ahead. I crawled forward, keeping my camera rolling. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and what I saw there made me stop breathing. Miners. A dozen men in period clothing, working by lantern light, striking pickaxes against the chamber walls. They moved with purpose, filling ore carts with rock, hauling timbers to shore up new tunnels. They were talking to each other, discussing the ore quality, complaining about working conditions, debating whether the vein they'd found would prove profitable. They were ghosts. They had to be ghosts. But they looked solid, real, casting shadows in the lantern light. And they were completely unaware of my presence. I filmed it all, keeping my camera steady despite my shaking hands. This was incredible. Impossible, but incredible. Actual evidence of paranormal activity, captured on professional equipment. My documentary wasn't just going to get an A+, it was going to revolutionize ghost research. One of the miners looked up from his work and saw me. His eyes widened, and he dropped his pickaxe. What in hell? The other miners turned to look. They saw me too, saw my camera, saw my modern clothes and equipment. For a moment, nobody moved. Then chaos erupted. "It's a demon," one shouted. "Devil's spawn. Kill it before it kills us." They came at me with pickaxes, shovels, anything they could grab. I scrambled backward, back toward the tunnel entrance, but my camera strap caught on a timber support. I yanked it free, and the timber shifted, groaned. The ceiling above the chamber began to collapse. I ran. Dust and debris fell around me as I crawled frantically toward the entrance, the sounds of the cave-in roaring behind me. I burst out of the tunnel, fell onto the rocky ground outside, and lay there gasping while the entire mine entrance caved in, sealing itself completely. When I could breathe again, I checked my camera. Still recording. The LED light was still on. I was covered in rock dust but uninjured, and I had footage, 9 hours of continuous recording. The camera must have been running the entire time I was inside. I gathered my equipment and left Total Wreck immediately, not bothering to pack up carefully, just throwing everything in my car and driving back to Tucson at speeds that should have gotten me arrested. I didn't stop until I was in my apartment, doors locked, lights on, reviewing the footage on my laptop. The first 47 minutes were perfect, exactly what I'd shot before entering the mine. The assay office, the carefully composed shots, my voiceover. Then it cut to black for 8 hours and 13 minutes, not static, not darkness, just a complete absence of recording, as if the camera had been turned off, even though I knew it hadn't been. Then the footage resumed. Me crawling out of the mine entrance, covered in dust, the timestamp showing 9 hours had passed. Everything I'd filmed inside the mine, the ghost miners, the confrontation, the cave-in, was gone. Not corrupted, not damaged, just completely missing from the recording. I sat there for hours, trying to understand what happened. Had I hallucinated? Some kind of carbon monoxide poisoning from the mine. But the dust on my clothes was real. The scrapes on my hands from crawling were real, and the camera showed 9 hours had elapsed, even if it didn't show what happened during those hours. The next morning, I drove back to Total Wreck. The mine entrance I'd crawled through was sealed, not with loose boards like before, but completely buried under tons of rock and dirt. It looked like it had been sealed for decades, and when I examined the area carefully, I found no evidence that anyone had moved the boards, no footprints, no disturbance of any kind. I submitted the 47 minutes of usable footage for my thesis. My professor gave me a B+, said it was technically competent, but lacked the depth and insight she'd expected from my proposal. I graduated, moved to Los Angeles, got a job in production design rather than directing. Gave up on documentaries entirely. For 3 years, I told myself I'd imagined the whole thing. The missing 8 hours were just a camera malfunction, a corrupted memory card, nothing supernatural. I had the camera analyzed. A technician confirmed that 9 hours of recording time were somehow completely blank, which shouldn't be possible with the equipment I'd been using. But equipment fails sometimes. Then in April 2024, exactly 3 years after my night at Total Wreck, I received a package at my LA apartment. No return address, just my name and address in neat handwriting. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "You should see what you became." I almost threw it away, almost convinced myself it was junk mail or a prank. But curiosity won. I plugged the USB drive into my computer. It contained video files, 8 hours and 13 minutes of video files, time-stamped for my night at Total Wreck. The missing footage. I watched it once. I will never watch it again. The footage starts when I crawl into the mine tunnel. Everything I remembered is there. The ghost miners, the confrontation, me scrambling to escape. But the timestamp shows I didn't escape immediately. I was in that mine for 8 hours, and what I did during those 8 hours. The ceiling didn't collapse. The miners didn't attack me. Instead, after that initial confrontation, they surrounded me, speaking in voices that overlapped and echoed until individual words became impossible to distinguish. The camera shows me lowering it slowly, setting it on the ground, still recording, then turning to face them. For the next 8 hours, I worked with them. I picked up a pickaxe, where it came from, I don't know, and I mined. I hauled ore in carts that shouldn't exist. I shored up tunnel supports with timber that had rotted away decades ago. I spoke to the miners in a voice that sounds like mine, but with an accent I don't have. Using mining terminology I don't know. I laughed at jokes I don't remember. I complained about working conditions in a mine that closed in the 1890s. The footage shows me becoming one of them, existing in their time, their reality. And the longer I worked, the more I changed. My clothes shifted, became period-appropriate work clothes. My hands, visible when I reached for tools, looked different, more calloused, older, covered in mine dust that looked permanent rather than temporary. My face, briefly visible when I passed in front of a lantern, showed someone who'd been underground for months, maybe years. Near the end of the footage, one of the miners speaks directly to the camera. He'll go back soon. The mountain takes them for a while, shows them what it was like, then sends them back. But part of him stays. Always stays. That's the price for seeing. The final minutes show me walking back through the tunnel toward the entrance. My appearance gradually shifting back to normal. Clothes changing, hands, becoming my own again. The camera picks itself up. I can see my hand reaching for it, looking normal now. And then the footage ends as I crawl out into the night. I've tried to understand what happened. The best explanation I have is that Total Wreck, or specifically that mine, exists in multiple times simultaneously. When I entered, I slipped into the 1880s version for 8 hours. Experienced time as those miners experienced it, became temporarily part of their reality. The camera recorded it all, but the footage was somehow separated from the main recording, held in a space between times until... what? Until something decided I was ready to see it. Until enough time had passed. The note that came with the USB drive offered no explanation, and I haven't found any way to trace where it came from. Someone sent me that footage. Someone knew what happened to me in that mine. Someone has been watching, waiting, maybe experiencing the same thing themselves. I haven't told anyone about the footage. My girlfriend Stella and I broke up 6 months after graduation for unrelated reasons. My family wouldn't understand. My film school friends would think I'd faked it for attention. So I keep it to myself, this knowledge that I spent 8 hours in the 1880s working a mine alongside ghosts or time-displaced miners, or whatever they were. What disturbs me most isn't the missing time or the impossible footage. It's what the miner said at the end. Part of him stays. Because sometimes, late at night, I dream about the mine. And in those dreams, I'm still there, still swinging a pickaxe, still hauling ore carts, still living and working in Total Wreck's eternal 1880s. Part of me never left that mine. Part of me is still underground, trapped in a loop of extraction labor that never ends. I don't make documentaries anymore. I don't film in abandoned places. I work in production design for corporate videos and commercials, creating sterile, safe environments with no history and no ghosts. It's boring work, but it's safer than discovering that some places don't stay in the past, that sometimes overlap with others, and that curiosity can trap you in moments that never end. The USB drive is still in my apartment, hidden in a box with other things I don't want to think about. The footage is backed up on a hard drive I'll never access. And somewhere in Pima County, the Total Wreck mine continues to exist in multiple times simultaneously, waiting for the next curious person to crawl inside and discover that the past isn't really past. It's just underground, working eternal shifts, extracting ore that never runs out from veins that never close. Sometimes I wonder if I should go back, if I should crawl into that mine again and find the version of myself that stayed, that's still there, swinging a pickaxe in the eternal 1880s. But I know what would happen. I'd slip back into that time, become that version of myself again, and this time I might not come back. This time, the mountain might keep all of me instead of just a part. So I stay in Los Angeles, work my boring job, and try not to think about the 8 hours I can't remember, but now have documented proof existed. I try not to think about what it means that I became someone else, something else, for a third of a day. I try not to wonder who sent me that footage and why, or what it means that they had access to something that shouldn't exist. The Total Wreck took its name from a claim dispute, from one miner's complaint about being cheated. But maybe the name means something else. Maybe every person who goes into that mine comes out a total wreck, carrying pieces of the past embedded in them, like ore in rock. Never quite the same, never quite whole. I'm 25 now, 4 years past that night, and I still don't have answers. Just footage I'll never show anyone, and dreams where I'm underground forever, mining for something I'll never find in a darkness that never ends. That's the price for seeing, the miner said. And he was right. My wife and I can't agree on what happened at the Fairbank ghost town, and that disagreement destroyed our marriage. We both experienced the same 30 minutes 3 times in a row, but we remember completely different versions of events. And both of us have evidence we're right. My name is Sawyer. I'm 29 years old, and in December 2018, my wife Helena and I drove to Fairbank for our 5th anniversary. We'd been together since college, married for 5 years, and we developed a tradition of visiting ghost towns for our anniversaries. Quirky, romantic in a morbid sort of way, and it gave us something unique to share. Fairbank seemed perfect. A well-preserved ghost town along the San Pedro River, featuring an old train station, schoolhouse, and several intact buildings. It was late afternoon when we arrived, golden hour light painting everything in warm tones. Helena brought her camera. She was an amateur photographer. And I brought a portable speaker to play our wedding song at sunset, continuing another of our traditions. The plan was simple. Explore for an hour, take photos, have a small picnic by the train station, then drive back to Tucson before dark. The train station was our first stop. It stood intact, a simple wooden structure with a covered platform and benches, where passengers once waited for trains that stopped running decades ago. Helena set up her camera on a tripod to capture the building with the late afternoon light. I sat on one of the benches, checking our picnic supplies when I heard it. A train whistle, distant but clear, coming from the south. "Did you hear that?" I asked Helena. She looked up from her camera. "Hear what?" "Train whistle, from down the tracks." She listened, shook her head. "I don't hear anything. Maybe a car horn from the highway." But I knew what I'd heard. A train whistle, unmistakable, growing closer. I walked to the edge of the platform, looking south along the old rail line. The tracks were still there, rusted and overgrown, but clearly visible, stretching into the distance. And I could hear it now, not just the whistle, but the rumble of an approaching train, the sound of steel wheels on rails. "Sawyer, what are you doing?" Helena called. "Come back. I want to get some shots with you in them." I turned to answer her. And that's when things became strange. Helena was standing in exactly the same position she'd been a moment ago, adjusting her camera the same way, saying the exact same words. "Come back. I want to get some shots with you in them." "You just said that," I told her. "Said what?" "I haven't said anything. You're being weird." The train whistle sounded again, same distance, same volume. I checked my phone, 5:47 p.m. I looked at the old station clock mounted on the building. It was stopped at 5:47. Coincidence, probably, but unsettling. "What time is it?" I asked Helena. She checked her phone. 5:47. "Why?" "Just checking." I sat back down on the bench, trying to shake off the strange feeling. Helena continued photographing. I heard the train whistle again, third time, same distance, not getting closer, not fading. I checked my phone again, 5:47 p.m. The time hadn't changed. "Helena, look at your phone. What time does it say?" She sighed, annoyed at the interruption, but checked. 5:47. "Sawyer, what's going on with you? You're acting strange." "The time isn't changing. It's been 5:47 for..." I didn't know how long. I checked 3 times, maybe more, and the time remained frozen. "That's impossible. Time doesn't just stop." But when she looked at her phone again, her expression changed. "That's weird. It does say 5:47. Must be a glitch. We're probably in a dead zone for cell signal." I heard the train whistle again. 4th time, same distance. Helena still didn't react to it, didn't seem to hear it at all. I stood and walked to the platform edge again, looking south. The tracks stretched empty, but I could feel vibrations through the wooden platform, feel the rumble of something heavy approaching. When I turned back, Helena was in the same position, adjusting her camera, and she said, "Come back. I want to get some shots with you in them." "You've said that 3 times now," I said, my voice tight with rising panic. "No, I haven't." "Sawyer, seriously, you're freaking me out. Are you feeling okay?" The loop was happening. We were stuck in the same 30 minutes, repeating. I could feel it, could sense the repetition even if Helena couldn't. The train whistle sounded. 5th time, same distance, never arriving, never leaving. "What time is it?" I demanded. Helena checked her phone, and I saw her hands start shaking. "It says 5:47, but that's impossible. It was 5:47 5 minutes ago when you first asked." "It's been 5:47 for longer than that. We're stuck. This moment, this time, we're trapped in it." "That's insane. Time doesn't work that way." But I could see she was scared now, could see her recognizing something was wrong. I sat back down, trying to think. Ghost towns don't trap people in time loops. That's not how reality works. But the train whistle sounded again, 6th time, and the station clock still read 5:47, and my phone still showed 5:47, and Helena said for the 4th time, "Come back. I want to get some shots with you in them." The loop continued, 7 times, 8 times. Each cycle, I became more certain we were trapped, and each cycle, Helena seemed to reset slightly, not quite remembering that we'd had this conversation before. The train whistle kept sounding, always the same distance, and I began to understand. The train was stuck too. Somewhere south of Fairbank, a ghost train was approaching the station. but it would never arrive because time had stopped at 5:47, the moment before it would have pulled in. On the 9th repetition, I tried something different. Instead of walking to the platform edge, I grabbed Helena's hand and pulled her away from the station. "Sawyer, what are you? We need to leave. Right now. Get to the car." We ran to our car, parked near the old schoolhouse. I started the engine, drove out of Fairbank as fast as the dirt road allowed. As we passed the town boundary, I felt something shift, like passing through a membrane. I checked my phone. 6:23 p.m. Time had jumped forward, skipping the 30 minutes we'd been trapped in. "What the hell was that?" Helena gasped. "Why did we run?" "You felt it too? The loop?" "Loop? What loop?" "Sawyer, you just grabbed me and dragged me to the car without explanation. You scared the hell out of me." We argued the entire drive back to Tucson. Helena insisted nothing strange had happened, that I'd had some kind of episode or panic attack and forced us to leave. I insisted we'd been trapped in a time loop, repeating the same 30 minutes over and over. She said I was being irrational. I said she was in denial. When we got home, Helena uploaded her photos to her computer. "Look," she said, showing me the screen. "This is what actually happened." Her camera had time-stamped every photo. The images showed us at Fairbank from 5:35 p.m. to 5:47 p.m. Exactly 12 minutes of activity. No loop, no repetition. Just a normal visit to a ghost town cut short by my bizarre behavior. But when I checked my phone's activity log, it showed something different. My phone registered being at Fairbank's location from 5:35 p.m. to 6:23 p.m., 48 minutes, with a continuous GPS track showing us stationary at the train station from 5:47 to 6:23, 36 minutes that Helena's camera didn't record. We both had evidence. Her photos showed 12 minutes. My phone showed 48 minutes. We'd both been there, experienced the same event, but we had completely different records of what happened, and completely different memories. The fight that followed lasted weeks. Helena thought I'd somehow manipulated my phone's data to support a delusion. I thought her camera had malfunctioned, failed to record the loops. We couldn't reconcile the contradiction. We couldn't agree on a basic fact about our shared experience. By our 6th anniversary, we were separated. By the 7th, divorced. The Fairbank incident became a symbol of everything wrong with our marriage. Our inability to agree, to trust each other's perceptions, to accept that we might both be right about different things. I've been back to Fairbank twice since then, alone. Both times I arrived at 5:30 p.m. and stayed until after 6:00 p.m., hoping to experience the loop again, hoping to document it better. Both times, nothing unusual happened. Time progressed normally, no train whistles, no repetitions. But I know what I experienced. I know we were trapped in those 30 minutes, repeating them over and over until I forced us to leave. And I know Helena experienced something different, something she can prove with time-stamped photographs that contradict my phone's GPS data. The Fairbank train station is still there, still waiting for a train that never arrives. And somewhere in the gap between Helena's truth and my truth, between her 12 minutes and my 48 minutes, there's a version of us still trapped at that platform, still repeating 5:47 forever, still unable to agree on what's happening to us. Some ghost towns don't just haunt you. They split you, create different realities for different people, make it impossible to share experiences even when you're standing side by side. Fairbank took our anniversary and turned it into evidence that two people can witness the same event and come away with completely different, equally valid versions of what happened. I'm 34 now, remarried to someone who's never been to a ghost town and never wants to go. We don't have quirky traditions. We don't take risks with the unexplained. And I never mention Fairbank. Never try to explain why I'm terrified of old train stations. Never admit that sometimes I still hear that whistle, distant, approaching, never arriving, and check my phone to make sure time is still moving forward. The worst part isn't being trapped. It's being trapped with someone you love and discovering that you're experiencing completely different traps, completely different realities, and there's no way to reconcile the difference. That's what Fairbank taught me. Sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't the supernatural. It's realizing that the person closest to you lives in a different version of reality, and no amount of evidence or argument can bridge that gap. Helena still has her photos. I still have my GPS logs. We're both right. We're both wrong. And somewhere in the space between our truths, Fairbank's train station waits at 5:47, forever frozen, forever splitting reality into incompatible versions that can never be resolved. They found me unconscious in the old Gleeson jail cell with marks on my body that matched bruises on a corpse from 1916. The forensic pathologist who examined me said the pattern was impossible, unless something dead had been holding me down for hours, trying to break the same bones that had been broken in a prisoner who died there over a century ago. My name is Easton. I'm 32 years old, and I used to be a paranormal investigator. Notice I said, used to be. What happened in Gleeson on August 23, 2023, ended my career and very nearly ended my life. I'd been investigating supposedly haunted locations for 8 years, always solo, always overnight. I believed in the scientific method, controlled conditions, quality recording equipment, detailed documentation. Most investigations turned up nothing. Bad wiring causing EMF spikes, natural sounds people interpreted as voices, sleep deprivation creating hallucinations. I'd debunked dozens of hauntings. I'd never found convincing evidence of actual paranormal activity. Gleeson's old jail seemed perfect for my methodology. The ghost town in Cochise County had a well-documented violent history, and the jail, a small stone structure with 2 cells, was supposedly one of the most actively haunted locations in Arizona. Multiple investigators reported being touched, pushed, and experiencing sudden temperature drops. I wanted to test these claims under controlled conditions. My experiment was simple. I'd lock myself inside one of the cells overnight with multiple cameras recording from different angles, temperature sensors, and EMF detectors. If something paranormal occurred, I'd have documentation from multiple sources showing exactly what happened and ruling out natural explanations. I arrived at Gleeson around 7 p.m. The jail stood separate from the other ruins, a solid stone building with barred windows and a heavy wooden door. Inside were 2 cells divided by iron bars, each maybe 8 feet by 6 feet. The air smelled of dust and something else, something organic and wrong, like meat left to rot. I set up my equipment methodically. Camera 1 in the corner of my cell, pointing at the door. Camera 2 outside the cell, capturing the full interior. Camera 3 in the second cell for a different angle. Temperature sensors in all 3 locations. EMF detector on the floor next to my sleeping bag. At 9 p.m., I locked myself inside the left cell. I had the key in my pocket. I could let myself out anytime. This was science, not bravado. I settled into my sleeping bag and began my recorded observations, speaking clearly for the cameras. 9:03 p.m. Beginning overnight investigation, temperature 68 degrees, EMF baseline readings normal, no anomalous activity detected. The first hour passed uneventfully. I made observations every 15 minutes, noting temperature fluctuations and environmental sounds. By 10:30 p.m., I was getting drowsy, fighting to stay alert. That's when the temperature dropped. Not gradually, instantly. My breath fogged in front of me and the temperature sensor dropped from 68 to 41 degrees in under 30 seconds. I sat up, fully alert now, checking the EMF detector. The needle was spiking wildly. 10:34 p.m., experiencing significant temperature drop and EMF spike, checking for natural causes. I looked for drafts, checked the windows, all sealed. No explanation for the sudden temperature change. Then I heard it. Breathing. Heavy, labored breathing coming from the cell next to mine. 10:35 p.m. Auditory phenomenon detected, possible EVP Recording. The breathing grew louder, closer. I could see my breath in the cold air, could feel the temperature still dropping. The EMF detector's needle maxed out, the device screaming. Then I saw him. A man in the next cell pressed against the bars separating us. His face was gray, his eyes sunken, and his hands, dear God, his hands were broken, bent at unnatural angles. He stared at me with an expression of pure rage. "You," he said, his voice like gravel scraping stone. "You locked yourself in, just like me." I scrambled backward until my back hit the cell wall. This wasn't a shadow, wasn't an EMF spike. This was a full-body apparition, visible, speaking, staring at me with hatred that felt physical. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my scientific objectivity evaporating. "Want?" He laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "I want out. Been wanting out since 1916, but this cell, it don't let go. Once you're locked in here, you're locked in forever." He reached through the bars toward me. His broken hands shouldn't have been able to grip anything, but they did. They grabbed the bars and began pulling, and the metal groaned under impossible pressure. I fumbled for the key in my pocket, my hand shaking so badly I dropped it twice. The ghost, because that's what it was, no denying it now, kept pulling at the bars. And they were bending, actually bending, like the old iron was as soft as clay. "They beat me in here," he said, conversational now. "Sheriff and his boys. Beat me for 3 days because I stole a horse. Broke my hands, broke my ribs, broke my legs. Left me to die. Took me 4 days to finish dying, and I've been here ever since, waiting for someone stupid enough to lock themselves in. I got the key in the lock finally, turned it. The door didn't open. I turned it again. Nothing. The mechanism was jammed or broken, or the ghost was doing something to it. I was trapped. Now you know how it feels, the ghost said. Now you stay." The bars between our cells bent further, creating a gap wide enough for him to reach through. His broken hands grabbed my arm, and pain exploded through me. It felt like my bones were being crushed, like invisible vice grips were tightening around my forearm. I screamed, pulled away, but his grip was iron. He dragged me toward the bars, and I could see his face clearly now. The gray skin, the sunken eyes, the hatred that had festered for over a century. "You wanted ghosts," he whispered. "You wanted proof. Here's your proof." He grabbed my other arm. More pain, bones grinding together under pressure that shouldn't exist. I could feel bruises forming, could feel something cracking in my left wrist. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Ghosts couldn't physically harm people. That was the rule. That was science. But science didn't account for this. Science didn't account for hands that had been broken for 100 years, having the strength to break mine. I don't remember losing consciousness. The doctors told me later that my body shut down from pain and shock. What I do remember is waking up in a hospital bed in Tucson with a detective sitting beside me asking me questions I couldn't answer. "Mr. Easton, can you tell us what happened in Gleeson?" The ghost, the man in the cell, he grabbed me. The detective's expression didn't change. "We found you unconscious in the jail cell at approximately 6 a.m. A hiker heard you screaming and called 911. The cell door was unlocked from the inside. You have severe bruising on both arms, a fractured left wrist, and 3 cracked ribs. Can you explain the injuries?" "I told you. The ghost. There's no evidence of another person being in that jail. Your cameras recorded the entire night. Would you like to see the footage?" They showed me. 8 hours of footage from 3 angles. At 10:34 p.m., the temperature drop registered on camera. At 10:35 p.m., I started talking to empty air. At 10:36 p.m., I started screaming. And then, this was the part that made my blood run cold, I started hitting myself. The footage showed me slamming my own arms against the iron bars, over and over, creating the bruises. Showed me twisting my own wrist until it fractured. Showed me throwing myself against the cell wall hard enough to crack ribs. For hours, I attacked myself while screaming about someone who wasn't there. Psychotic episode, the psychiatrist diagnosed. Possibly brought on by isolation, suggestion, and the expectation of paranormal activity. Your mind created an experience consistent with your expectations. But they couldn't explain the bruise pattern. The forensic pathologist who examined me was called in because something about the injuries troubled the attending physician. The pathologist compared my bruises to historical photographs of bodies from Gleeson's jail. Photographs from the county archives showing a prisoner who died in 1916 from injuries sustained during a beating. The bruise patterns matched exactly. The same finger width spacing, the same pressure points, the same distinctive marks. As if the same hands that beat that prisoner to death in 1916 had held me in 2023. It's impossible, the pathologist told me privately. Bruises are created by impact and pressure patterns unique to the moment they're inflicted. You couldn't have replicated these patterns by hitting yourself against bars. The angles are wrong. The pressure distribution is wrong. But I can't put in my official report that a ghost from 1916 assaulted you. They'd revoke my license. I was hospitalized for a week, then released with prescriptions for antipsychotics and orders to follow up with a psychiatrist. I never went to the follow-up appointments. I didn't need medication. I needed to accept what happened. The ghost was real. He grabbed me. He tried to break my bones the same way his bones had been broken. And my cameras didn't capture it because whatever rules govern paranormal phenomena don't include showing up on digital recording devices, or they show up in ways we interpret as mental illness rather than supernatural assault. I quit paranormal investigation immediately, sold all my equipment, deleted my website, cut contact with everyone in the field. I work in IT now, a safe job in a modern office with fluorescent lights and no history, but I still have the scars. The bruises faded, the ribs healed, even the wrist fracture knitted back together. But I can still feel those hands sometimes, in quiet moments, ghost pressure on my arms, reminding me that I locked myself in that cell willingly, and part of me never left. The Gleeson jail is still there, still standing, still waiting for the next investigator who thinks they're smart enough, scientific enough, prepared enough to spend a night locked in its cells. I hope nobody's that stupid. But I know someone will be, because I was. And when they wake up in a hospital with injuries they can't explain and footage showing them attacking themselves, maybe they'll understand what I learned. Some places trap you. Some ghosts are real. And some experiments should never be conducted because the results might prove you right in ways you'll never recover from. All four of us saw different roads leading out of the abandoned mining area, and we each swore with absolute certainty that ours was the only real one. 28 hours later, when search and rescue found us wandering miles apart from our vehicle in opposite directions, none of us could explain how we'd gotten separated, or why we'd all been so convinced we were right. I'm Colton, father of two, and in February 2024, my family took what should have been a simple day trip through southeastern Arizona. My wife Phoenix was driving, our daughter Jade sat behind me, and our son Donovan rode behind Phoenix. We were heading from Tucson to Wilcox, taking the scenic route through the Dos Cabezas Mountains because Jade, 16 at the time, was working on a photography project about ghost towns and wanted shots of some of the old mining camps. The GPS led us off the main highway onto increasingly rough dirt roads. We'd been driving for maybe 30 minutes when Phoenix said, "This doesn't feel right. Are we still on the correct route?" I checked my phone's GPS. "Yeah, we're good. Says the road continues another 2 miles, then connects to Highway 186. But the road kept getting worse. More washboard, more rocks. The February afternoon sun was bright, temperature in the low 60s, perfect weather. No reason to feel uneasy, yet I did. Something about the landscape felt off, disorienting. The mountains looked wrong, like I was seeing them from angles that shouldn't exist. "Dad, I think we should turn around," Donovan said. He was 12, usually quiet, and the concern in his voice made me pay attention. "Let's go another mile," I said. If it doesn't improve, we'll turn back. That's when we found it. Not a ghost town exactly, but remains of mining operations, tailings piles, collapsed structures, rusted equipment scattered across the hillside. Jade immediately wanted to stop and take photos. Phoenix parked near what looked like an old assay office, a stone building with most of its roof intact. We all got out, stretching our legs. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just 4 people standing in the middle of abandoned mining ruins, with the sun still bright overhead. "This place is creepy," Jade said, but she was already setting up her camera. In a good way. Very photogenic. I walked around the building while Phoenix and Donovan explored nearby. That's when my phone died. Not low battery. Completely dead, from 73% to nothing in an instant. I checked Phoenix's phone. Also dead. The kids' phones. Dead. "Car battery's probably fine," I told Phoenix, seeing her expression. "Phone's just glitched. Let's give Jade 10 minutes for photos, then head out." But when we tried to leave, that's when the problem started. I walked back to where we'd parked the car. It was there, our silver Honda Pilot, exactly where we'd left it. But Phoenix, walking from a different direction, started calling out, "Colton, the car's over here. Why aren't you walking the wrong way?" "I'm looking right at it," I called back. "It's 30 feet in front of me." "No, it's over here. I can see it clearly." I walked toward Phoenix's voice, away from where I could clearly see our vehicle. When I reached her, she was standing next to empty space, pointing at nothing. "It's right here," she insisted. "I'm touching the hood. Can't you see it?" "Phoenix, there's nothing there. The car is back where I was, where I parked it." I pointed, but from this angle, I couldn't see the vehicle anymore. The landscape had shifted somehow, and I couldn't orient myself to where I'd just been standing. Jade and Donovan came running. "Why are you guys yelling?" Jade asked. "Where's the car?" I asked her. She pointed in a completely different direction from where either Phoenix or I had indicated. "Right there, like 50 yards that way." "Why?" "That's not where we parked," Donovan said, pointing in yet a 4th direction. "It's over there. I can see it from here." We stood in a circle, each of us pointing at different empty patches of landscape. Each of us absolutely certain we were looking at our vehicle. The sun was still bright. No fog, no weather issues that could explain visual confusion. But somehow, we'd all become disoriented in the span of 10 minutes. "Okay, this is ridiculous," Phoenix said. "Let's all walk together toward where I see the car. Just follow me." We tried. We walked as a group in the direction Phoenix indicated, but after maybe 30 yards, she stopped, confused. "It was right here. I was sure it was right here." "Let's try my direction," Jade offered. We walked toward where she'd pointed. Nothing. Then toward Donovan's direction. Nothing. Then mine. Still nothing. An hour passed. The sun moved lower in the sky, and we still couldn't find our car. We kept walking in circles, each of us periodically seeing the vehicle in different locations. But whenever we approached, it wasn't there. "We need to stick together and think logically," I said, trying to control my rising panic. "The car has to be here somewhere. Let's do a grid search." But the landscape wouldn't cooperate. We'd mark a boulder as a reference point, walk 50 feet, turn around, and the boulder would be gone. Or in a different spot. The mining ruins kept shifting position relative to where we stood. The mountains that should have been constant landmarks appeared to move. As the sun set, Phoenix made a decision. "I'm walking toward what I see as the main road. I know I'm right. You 3 can come with me or go your own ways, but I'm not staying here after dark." "That's not the way to the road," I argued. "The road is that direction," I pointed. "You're both wrong," Jade said. "I remember exactly which direction we came from." Donovan started crying. "Why can't we all see the same thing? Why is everything different?" That's the question none of us could answer. We were standing in the same physical space, looking at the same landscape, but perceiving completely different realities. And each of us was so certain we were correct that we couldn't accept anyone else's perception. The decision to split up was the worst mistake we could have made, but in the moment, it seemed logical. We agreed to walk in our individual directions, confident we'd reach the main road, and then send help for the others. We agreed to keep shouting to maintain contact. We agreed it would be fine. It wasn't fine. Within 15 minutes, we couldn't hear each other anymore, even though we hadn't walked that far. The darkness came on faster than it should have, and the cold came with it. February desert nights dropping from the 60s into the 30s. None of us had worn heavy coats. None of us had brought supplies for an overnight stay. I walked for hours in what I was certain was the correct direction. The mining ruins disappeared behind me, and I found myself in open desert, following what looked like a road. But the road kept branching, splitting into multiple paths that all looked equally valid. Every time I chose a direction, it felt right. But after walking for a while, I'd realize I'd gone in a circle and was back where I started. At some point, I don't know when, because my phone was dead, I saw headlights in the distance. I started running toward them, shouting for help, but the lights never got closer, never got farther. They just stayed at the horizon, always the same distance away, no matter how long I ran. I don't remember when I finally collapsed. I don't remember the rescue helicopter spotting me the next afternoon. The search and rescue team told me later they'd found Phoenix 8 miles east of the mining area, found Jade 12 miles south, found Donovan 6 miles west, and found me 9 miles north. We'd all walked in completely different directions, each convinced we were heading toward the main road. They found our car exactly where we'd parked it, at the mining ruins. Its doors were unlocked, keys in the ignition, no damage, no mechanical issues. Our phones, when they dried us out and checked them, were all fully charged. They'd never died. But none of us remembered them working after we'd left the car. The doctors diagnosed us with shared psychotic episode, possibly induced by carbon monoxide exposure from a natural gas seep at the mining site. But the mining area was tested. No gas, no toxins, nothing that could explain simultaneous hallucinations in 4 people. The psychologist suggested mass hysteria, folia fami, but that doesn't explain why we each saw different things, or why we ended up miles apart, or how we'd walked in perfectly opposite compass directions when we'd all claimed to be heading toward the same road. The worst part isn't that we got lost. It's that we still disagree about what happened. Phoenix insists the road she saw was real, that if we'd followed her, we'd have been fine. Jade maintains her direction was correct. Donovan, traumatized by the whole experience, refuses to talk about it at all. And I know with absolute certainty that my perception was accurate and everyone else's was distorted. We can't reconcile our experiences. We each have our version of events, and they're all incompatible. Search and rescue found us scattered across 30 square miles, and we have no explanation for how we got separated or why we walked in opposite directions when we'd all agreed on where we were going. Jade had to do therapy for 6 months and still won't get in a car for long drives. Donovan has nightmares about being lost and alone. Phoenix and I don't take family trips anymore. The trust is broken. How do you navigate as a family when you can't agree on basic perception? How do you make decisions when everyone sees different realities? The Dos Cabezas area is still there, still accessible, still has those mining ruins scattered across the hillsides. I'll never go back. None of us will. But sometimes I wonder if we ever really left, or if we're still there, walking in circles, each convinced we're heading the right direction, each seeing roads that don't exist, each alone in our version of reality while believing we're together. The mind map GPS shows different routes, and all of them are wrong, and all of them are right, and none of us will ever know which reality was real, if any of them were real at all. I'm a developer who specializes in turning ghost towns into profitable real estate, and I've never believed in the supernatural until a woman in 1880s mining clothes nearly killed me by making every piece of equipment I owned malfunction simultaneously. What terrifies me most isn't that she exists, but that she knew my name before I ever set foot in Cortland, as if she'd been waiting specifically for me to arrive. My name is Gleeson. I'm 52 years old, and I've made millions buying abandoned properties in dying towns and converting them into tourist attractions or luxury developments. Ghost towns are particularly profitable. The history sells itself, and most former residents are long dead, so there are no complicated ownership disputes. I'd successfully developed projects in 6 western states before I made the mistake of visiting Cortland, Arizona in October 2024. Cortland was a copper mining town that thrived from 1909 to 1942, producing massive amounts of high-grade ore before the mines flooded and the town died. By 2024, it was essentially empty. A few scattered ruins, some stone foundations, and the skeletal remains of what had been a bustling community of 5,000 people. I'd purchased 300 acres, including most of the old town center, for a fraction of what it was worth, planning to develop a combination ghost town museum and upscale resort. I arrived alone on a Tuesday morning to survey the property and begin preliminary site assessments. The October air was cool, the sky cloudless, and the ruins looked exactly as they had in the drone footage my team had provided. I started with the old smelter building, taking measurements and structural notes. My equipment was top of the line: laser measuring tools, digital tablets, professional cameras, everything I needed to document the site. That's when I saw her. A woman standing near what had been the mining company office, wearing a long dress and fitted jacket from the early 1900s. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not anger exactly, but something close to it. Determination, maybe. Purpose. "Excuse me," I called out. "This is private property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." She didn't move, didn't respond. I walked toward her, annoyed at the interruption. Historical reenactors sometimes visited ghost towns without permission, thinking the public had a right to access historical sites. I'd dealt with them before. As I got closer, I noticed details that made my scalp prickle. Her clothing wasn't costume quality. It looked authentic, worn, stained with actual copper dust. Her face had a strange quality, like an old photograph, the features slightly too sharp, too defined. And she was translucent. Not completely transparent, but I could see the stone wall behind her through her body. "Mr. Grayson Hall," she said, her voice clear despite the impossibility of her existence. "You've come to destroy what remains of Cortland, to build your resort on the graves of those who gave their lives to these mines. I am the Copper Queen, and I will not allow it." My tablet fell from my hands, shattering on the rocks. I tried to speak, couldn't. She knew my full name. She was see-through. None of this was possible. "You think the dead have no power," she continued, walking toward me. "No, floating, her feet not quite touching the ground. You think because we're gone, we have no claim to what we built. You're wrong." My laser measuring tool exploded in my hand, not malfunctioned. Exploded, pieces of circuit board and plastic flying in all directions. My phone in my pocket grew burning hot, forcing me to pull it out. The screen was melting, the battery swelling. I threw it away just before it burst into flames. "Everything you bring here will fail," the Copper Queen said. "Every machine, every tool, every plan. This town belongs to the dead, and we protect what's ours." I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran back to my truck, desperate to escape. But when I reached it, I found all 4 tires slashed, the engine smoking, and a crack spreading across the windshield as I watched. Inside, my backup laptop was sparking, the battery pack was hissing, and my portable generator was leaking fuel. The Copper Queen appeared beside the truck, her translucent form now surrounded by others, dozens of figures in mining clothes, all watching me with the same determination. Dead miners, dead workers, dead residents of a town I'd planned to erase and replace with luxury condos. "You have a choice," she said. "Leave Cortland as it is, a monument to those who died here, or watch everything you own turn to ash. Your equipment, your investments, your reputation. We have eternity to destroy what you build. You have one lifetime to profit. Who do you think will win? My truck's fuel tank ruptured. Gasoline poured onto the ground, pooling around the tires. One of the ghost miners held up a translucent hand, and I swear I saw a spark, a flicker of flame that could ignite the whole thing if she chose. "I'll leave," I said, my voice breaking. "I'll sell the property. I won't develop it." "You'll do more than that," the Copper Queen said. "You'll donate this land to the Historical Preservation Society. You'll ensure it remains protected. And you'll never speak of what happened here, because if you do, we'll follow you. Every project you touch will fail. Every building you construct will crumble. Every machine you operate will malfunction. Do you understand?" I understood. I nodded, unable to form words, and she gestured. The ghost miners faded, disappearing into the bright October sunlight. The Copper Queen remained a moment longer. "Cortland remembers her dead," she said. "We died to pull copper from the earth, and now we're bound to this place forever. But we have power here. Never forget that." She vanished. The fuel stopped leaking from my truck. My phone, still smoking on the ground, simply stopped burning. Everything became quiet, normal, except for the destroyed equipment surrounding me. I hiked 8 miles to the nearest highway and called for help. My insurance company asked questions I couldn't answer about how all my equipment had failed simultaneously. The police investigated, found no evidence of vandalism, suggested equipment malfunction due to environmental factors. I donated the Cortland property to the Arizona Historical Society the following week, taking a massive financial loss, but unable to shake the memory of the Copper Queen's warning. My business partners think I had a breakdown. My lawyers think I made an irrational decision. None of them know the truth. I still develop properties, but I won't touch ghost towns anymore. Too many dead, too many stories, too much history that doesn't want to be erased. Cortland stands as it was, protected now, the ruins slowly returning to the desert. And somewhere among those ruins, the Copper Queen watches over her domain, ready to defend it against anyone foolish enough to disturb the dead. I'm 52 years old, wealthy, successful, and terrified of a woman who died over a century ago, but somehow knew my name, knew my plans, and had the power to destroy everything I brought to her town. The supernatural is real. The dead protect what they love, and some places will never be for sale, no matter how much money you offer. If stories like these keep you up at night, if you crave more encounters with Arizona's darkest secrets and the spirits that refuse to let go, then you need to join the Haunted Fears horror family right now. We bring you terrifying true stories from America's most haunted places every single day. Tales that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the dead and the places they haunt. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and become part of our community. Because the dead are waiting, and their stories deserve to be told. Welcome to Haunted Fears, where every shadow has a story, and every story will haunt you forever.